Chapter 51. Cassius Black. It's dragons, whispered Hermione, as she ambushed the three of them in the library once more. Both Daphne's and Tracy's heads snapped towards her, as Cassius continued to work on his transfiguration homework. What? Asked Tracy. The first task, Hermione clarified, clearly flabbergasted by the information, as both Daphne and Tracy realized the gravity of the situation as well. Dragons. They both gasped as Hermione nodded and pulled out a chair beside Tracy. Yes, I don't know the details, but I can confirm that the first task involves dragons, and Tracy shook her head. What the hell are they thinking? She gasped, and he looked up to see all three of them eyeing him with pity and concern, before sighing. I already knew, and it took a second for the shock to register. What? Tracy gasped, and he shrugged. Yeah, and this time it was Hermione who spoke up. Then why aren't you making preparations? Asked Hermione, and he raised a brow. Because I am not participating in the tournament, he answered easily, much to her surprise. Why? She asked. Because I don't want to, and she turned towards Daphne and Tracy for support, but both of them already knew of his plans and had nothing to say. And you agree with this? She asked, and they both shrugged. It's his decision, Daphne argued as Hermione frowned. But why? She asked. Because I didn't want to participate in the tournament at all, he responded, as she continued. And why wouldn't you want to participate in the tournament? She asked. Because I did not out my name in, he clarified, as Hermione sat down. So, what are you going to do? I am not going to compete and protest, and she shook her head. Why don't you compete and win, to show it to whomever put your name in that you are not scared of them, she suggested, and he smiled. Spoken like a true Gryffindor, he answered. But I am a Ravenclaw and I would much rather sleep than play these stupid games, and she sighed. Well. But she had no argument now, and became sullen as she whispered. And I spent half an hour begging Fleur to tell me about the task. And then she dropped her head on the table, as Cassius shrugged. Speaking of that, I wanted to ask you something, he began, remembering one thing he had wanted to discuss with her. Yeah, she asked, still sullen at his decision. You have been staying at the Gryffindor dorm, right? And she nodded. Have you spent time with Harry and Ron? He asked, and she nodded again, though the way her eyes shifted at his question told him that she had an inkling about what his next question might be. Have you noticed anything different with Harry ever since you have come back? And both Daphne and Tracy were eyeing him, suspiciously as he asked that. Though he had already spoken about his suspicions to both of them before, but neither of them was as close to Harry as Hermione. And if his fears were correct, he needed to warn her as well. Maybe, she answered, and he noted how the answer was not a no. What have you noticed? He asked, probing further, making her frown again as she began to rub her chin. He is a bit more confident, more outgoing, and she seemed to want to say more, but she stopped herself. But isn't it all because of Sirius? And that was what his own mind argued, but in his heart he knew that this was not Sirius's influence. That this was something more. Maybe, but if you notice something else, do mention it, and she was smart enough to know that this was not simple. Why? And this time it was her asking that question. I am just curious, he lied, and she did not say anything at first. Well, you are the second person in the week to warn me about Harry. And that made his head snap towards her. Second? He asked, and she nodded. Yes, Fleur said something unusual as well, she added without much care. But this is not the first time she has warned me to stay away from boys, and she rolled her eyes at that, though this was not so funny for him. Perhaps you should listen to her then, Daphne added, adding in her own 2 cents. I might, but speaking of Harry, I did wanted to ask something of you, and she was along at Daphne now. Yes. I heard that you had a class in Dada about the Patronus charm. She asked, and Daphne nodded, as his curiosity rose as well. Yeah, we had one last week. It was not even in schedule, but Professor Black hardly ever sticks to it, so it was not that much of a surprise, but why would he bring up the charm out of nowhere? Unless, it was not his opinion to bring it. Was Harry in the class? He asked, and she nodded. Of course, he even tried to produce a patroness and failed, though he had leave early. He began to feel ill for some reason, and that was interesting. He couldn't do it, Hermione asked, and Daphne again shook her head. No, why? That's a surprise because Professor Lupin taught him the spell last year. And from what I know, he was able to do it last year, he even showed it to me and Ron. 0000. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. The stands were filled to the brim, and all the necessary arrangements had been made. Albus's heart ached to see a majestic creature like a dragon being used for sport, but there was little he could do to change the nature of the tasks. The participants had already been informed about the task, officially, though he had not missed how none of them had been surprised by the inclusion of dragons in the first task. Obviously, just like other traditions, cheating itself was one of the oldest traditions of the Triwizard Tournament. Albus himself did not wish to debase himself with such behavior. Still, he had little control over the actions of his colleagues and underlings who had chosen to rely on underhanded methods to receive an advantage. Though Igor and Maxime probably felt entitled to it, after the perceived injustice they had suffered during the selection, as Hogwarts was somehow awarded 2 champions. And despite his efforts, Albus remained oblivious to the culprit behind the scheme, or their intentions, and as he scanned the expansive crowd, he wondered just which one of them was behind this thing. And as his eyes landed on Harry, he realized that he had asked the wrong question. He already knew who? What he did not know was how, and the why. It is about to begin, added the headmistress Maxime, and the woman dwarfed them all, as she sat beside him, as Igor sat to her right while the two representatives from the ministry flanked his left. Yes, Albus agreed, as he watched Cedric Diggory take to the stage, as the large Hogwarts crowd cheered on their real champion. The Hufflepuff head boy was quite popular and waved to the crowd as he prepared himself for the task. That's Amos's boy, right? Asked Bagman boisterously, adjusting his rather plump frame in the chair. Indeed, Albus answered as Madame Maxime slowly cut in. Do I need to remind you that we, as the judges, are supposed to be impartial? She repeated in her accentuated French accent as she looked at the head of magical sports and games, who nodded quickly. Of course, I was just asking a question, and he wondered if the headmistress herself would follow her advice, as the cannon was shot, marking the beginning of the match. The task was quite simple, for each of the champions had to retrieve the golden egg lying in the dragon's nest. The dragon they had to face was chosen randomly by the champions themselves, and Amos's boy had lucked out having drawn the rather docile Swedish short snout. The boy waved his wand in an intricate pattern, as the rock in front of him transformed into a dog which began to circle around the dragon, taking away its attention as Cedric himself slowly approached the egg. It was impressive transfiguration work, and the head boy showed his resilience and fear as he picked up the dragon egg and began to retreat, but the majestic beast had caught onto the plot, as it screamed in anguish and swung its tail towards him, and began to thrash around. The attacks caught the Hufflepuff champion on the shoulder, as his scream filled the air, but in the end, the realization came too late, as Diggory vanished into the safety of the barriers. The dragon keepers came out and began to calm down the beast, as the students all clapped in applause. And as the angry dragon was taken away, the champion appeared out of the tents once more, to receive his score. He was pale and in pain, as he held his arm in a brace, as each of them stepped forward and awarded him his points, and despite Karkaroff's evident malice, the Hufflepuff champion scored a total of 38, a respectable total in his mind. And so, the tournament continued, and it was the Bosbaton champion who took the stage next, her dragon a common Welsh green. She used a bewitching spell, amplifying its potency through her own natural Vela charm, and put the mighty beast to sleep as she slowly approached the egg. But even a sleeping dragon was still a dragon, and so as a fire breath escaped the beast's mouth, it caught her by surprise, lighting her skirt on fire, forcing her to douse it out. In the end, it was a good showing, and she strode into the safety of the tents with the golden egg, applause and the love of many male students. In the end, she scored an even 36, with Karkaroff and Bagman taking away marks because of reasons that had nothing to do with her performance. And then it was time for the third champion, and Victor Krum walked onto the arena like a champion. His Quidditch career had made him accustomed to such fame and pressure, and the boy did not flinch even as he faced the mighty Chinese fireball, thrashing around the arena. And as soon as the cannon was fired, the boy aimed his wand at the dragon and activated the conjunctivitis curse, filling the arena with the dragon's screams and screeches as the boy ran towards the golden egg in a display of courage. That's my boy! Karkaroff cheered on, even as the dragon thrashed the egg with its tail, tearing it up, as it reeled with pain as Albus shook his head. In the end, even he was impressed with the Bulgarian seeker's agility as he took the egg and ran back, as the crowd roared in cheers, clearly entertained by his performance. Though one could not say the same for the dragon keepers, who were clearly angry, as they tried to control the raging beast. In the end, it took them quite a few minutes to stun the enraged beast, and once the arena was cleared, the Quidditch star came back to receive his scores. Despite Karakoff's bias, Madame Maxime showed herself to be a bigger person as she awarded the boy a fair score, handing him a total of 40 points, putting him above both Cedric Diggory and Fleur Delacour. And now it was time for the final event, and unlike before, there was not much of a cheer of applause for the next champion, and even the judges around him were frowning as Cassius took to the stage. The Ravenclaw prodigy had drawn the short straw, having drawn the most troublesome dragon of the lot. The Hungarian Horntail was the largest and the most feral of the 4 dragons and had been chosen by him, much to his dismay. Though if the rumors were true, it would not matter much. And everyone watched in anticipation as the cannon was fired, and the whole crowd went silent as the boy did not move an inch. Seconds turned into minutes as he simply stood there observing the mighty beast, and while some may think that it was fear that had stilled the boy, most of them knew the truth. This is a disgrace, roared Karkaroff, as Cassius Black took out what seemed to be a book from his pocket, plopped down on a transfigured chair, and began to read it with no care for the mighty dragon screaming down at him. Indeed, Albus, you must do something, Bagman added, rubbing his hand. And what am I to do? He asked, for he was an impartial judge. If he did not wish to compete, then why did he put his name in the goblet? Added the headmistress of Bosbaton's Academy of Magic. And that is his argument, Dumbledore answered. This is just his way of protesting, Dumbledore answered, as the rest of the judges shook their heads. Preposterous, and what are we supposed to do? Argued Karkaroff. Are we going to sit here for hours, and waste precious time all because of one unruly student? And he had no idea about that, and turned towards Rufus Screamgore, who knew the rulebook by heart. We will have no choice but to wait for at least 1 hour, and that would be quite grueling, and by now the crowd had begun to run out of patience as boos and shouts began to spark all over the stands. And even that is because of the amendment made by the ministry, but the rules are rigid. Until the allotted time passes, we cannot interfere with the task at all, no matter what, and so they would have no choice but to simply sit here for an hour. Well, that is disappointing, added Bagman as he stood up. If he is not going to do anything, I am simply leaving, and he was not the only one. Soon enough, Karkaroff vanished as well, along with Screamgore and Madame Maxime, leaving him alone in the judge's chambers as he sipped his third cup of tea. The stands were half empty by then as well, and of the allotted hour, only 5 minutes remained as Cassius Black sat there unmoved by the booze, chants, and curses, engrossed in his book. The Hungarian horntail splashed around, enraged by the disrespect, as it tried to attack the boy. Yet, the chain around its neck stopped it again and again. As he turned towards the stands, he eyed a young, bespectacled boy. "Now what will you do?" Yet before he had finished his words, screams and shouts filled the arena, as he turned towards the central ground and watched as the chain around the dragon's neck broke off, as it barreled towards the young black-haired boy with a mighty scream. "No. 0000. Read ahead and support me on Patreon. Help me write this and other such stories by becoming a patron. It would be pretty awesome of you and would mean a lot to me. www.patreon.com/drkest. Have a nice day." Chapter 52. Cassius Black. His body moved on instinct, as Cassius jumped to the side as the mighty dragon came barreling towards him. He scrapped his knees and elbows as he rolled on the ground, as the dragon struck the ward surrounding the arena, protecting the students, as pandemonium broke out in the stands. A part of him had hoped that the beast would turn its attention towards the people in the stands, yet as if to pay him back for the perceived disrespect, it attacked him once more, as it spat out a storm of fire towards him. Cassius tried to reach for his wand, yet as he reached for his holster, he found it gone, as the fire threatened to swallow him whole. "Prodigo!" he shouted, channeling years upon years of practice, and much to his relief a golden shield appeared in front of him, allowing him to escape as he summoned his wand. "Oxio," he whispered, and as the dragon aimed towards him, his wand flew towards him, and just as the fire was about to hit his wand was once more in his wand. Its familiar warmth filled him with power, relief, and rage as he spun the wand and the fire twisted around him in a circle before he whipped it back towards the dragon, as he scanned the surroundings in hope of the dragon keepers or any other help. And when he saw no one coming to his aid, he knew that he was on his own. Roar! And the Hungarian horntail spun its tail towards him, forcing him to give up on the attack, as he transfigured the rocks to shield himself, as he ducked down, as the tail rolled over the slope he had built to protect himself. And as the dragon tried to attack him again, he knew that he needed to buy some time to compose himself, and so he whipped out a few spells towards it, aiming them at its scales. Bombarda! And as the giant orb crashed into its body, the giant beast was pushed back, as Cassius began to transfigure the ground underneath, trying to pin it down, but a dragon's strength was enormous, and as he tried to hold it down with chains and rocks, it roared, and spat out fire towards him once more, forcing him on the back foot. Aquario! And it was a modified version of the Aquamenti spell, and water gushed out of his wand, like a jet as it doused the magical flames, yet these few seconds were enough for the Hungarian horntail to free itself from its bindings, as it flapped its wings and took to the skies. Dragons for all their might were quite intelligent creatures, and realizing that it was at a disadvantage while being on the ground, it had decided to take to the skies, and as it flew above him, it slapped its tail towards him once again as Cassius was forced to jump to the side again to avoid being hit. A horntail's tail was a damned good weapon, and it tore through stone, as the dragon began its barrage of attacks from the skies above. It used fire, its tail, and even boulders to attack him, as Cassius could do little but protect himself as he went on the defensive. His own counterattacks kept missing, as it became a headache to target a moving target, and as he glanced at the stands and the judge's table, he realized that they would not be coming to help him. Now, he had only two options. He could try to hold on for 5 more minutes, hoping that the allotted time would run out and the dragon keepers would come in to subdue the dragon, or he could stand here and fight. Now, a part of him believed that the chain breaking could be a coincidence, but Cassius did not believe in coincidences. Someone had just tried to kill him, and though he could not imagine the reason why they would try and do so, he had an idea just who it might be. Well, I guess it's time to let loose, and so he had to make a bit of a statement. He had little interest in the Triwizard tournament, but if you were going to come after my life, you better come prepared. Tempest! He screamed, suddenly bringing down his wand, as a lightning bolt rushed down from the skies and hit the horntail's back, forcing it to screech and scream in pain as it spewed fire towards him once more. And if a dragon was a magical creature, then its fire was a magical entity as well, and if spells could be cut, and he pushed raw magic into his wand's tip, as he slashed his wand wildly, belief in his power and theory pushing him on, and watched as the fire was cut into two, as he smiled wildly. Tempest! He shouted again, this time letting the spell gather enough power, and now as the lightning struck down, it was not one strike, it was a dozen strikes, all of which crashed into the Hungarian horntail's back, pushing it onto the ground. It still roared, as it tried to push itself back up and blitzed toward him, but Cassius had it right where he wanted it, and then he used one of Sirius's tricks. He had read up on the summoning charm trick, and Ray all said that it was quite a common dueling move, and now he was going to use it. Oxio versus. And he could feel the exhaustion kick in, but the spell began, as rocks, big and large, all flew towards the might dragon, and began to pile up on it. They hit him from the sides, from the front and from the back, giving it no respite, as Cassius continued to hold the spell, until the dragon was covered halfway in rocks. And as it spewed fire towards him in desperation, he smiled, and once more spun in the air, yet this time he redirected the spell towards the pile of rocks, keeping it in place, adding in his own magic. Incendio Solis. And the dragon roared, but the fire burnt through the rocks, melting them, as they imprisoned the lower half of the dragon, and as they became fixed, Cassius ended the spell, drenched in sweat as he looked the dragon in the eye. It was stuck, and now all he needed to do was to transfigure bindings out of the earth, as he wrapped it up in steel chain, and subdued the mighty beast. He glanced around, and the arena was silent as he stood there triumphantly until a cheer broke out, as the students began to chant his name. Cassius! 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 And it began with a single shout, and soon the rest of the students present joined in as Cassius looked towards a singular person in the stands, eyeing him innocently as Ron and Hermione shouted his name, and the rest of the Gryffindor house roared around him. Of the entire house, only he was quiet, and he felt their eyes met, and while looking at him, Cassius aimed his wand towards the golden egg in the corner of the arena, and whispered. Bombarda. 0000. Albus Dumbledore. Not many wizards could boast about facing a dragon and subduing it single-handedly. Yet Cassius Black had done just that while reminding the Ministry and all of them about the dangers of the Triwizard Tournament. What had transpired in the arena during the first task was an anomaly, and despite the exemplary show of prowess from the young Black family heir, Cassius Black had refused to complete the task. In the end, they had deliberated for hours to reach upon a conclusion on how to deal with him. The fact that Cassius Black's name had come out of the Goblet of Fire meant that he had no choice but to participate in the tournament. I must say you have caused us all quite a bit of trouble, and ever since he had learned that the boy in front of him knew of his own jaded past, he had been hesitant to meet him, for he knew that he might find himself searching for judgment in those eyes. But a part of him also knew that he could not turn away from the reality for much longer. He would have to face him again, if not for himself, then for the world. I could say the same thing for all of you, Cassius Black answered as he sat in his office, and the boy seemed somewhat unaffected by the fame and reverence that he had gained because of his masterful duel. Well, regardless, the judges have finally made their decision, and I have been tasked with giving you the rundown, Albus began. Despite the fact that you did not complete the first task, it cannot be denied that you showed great courage and daring, and for that, the judges have chosen to award you a total of 35 points, and the boy seemed frustrated by their decision. They do know that I intend to continue my protest, right? And indeed, they knew that once a name had come out of the goblet, the person in question had no choice but to participate. Yes, but unlike the other champions, you will lack the clue to guide you in the second task, that should be your penalty for not completing the task, and he seemed unbothered by that. I don't care, though I do want to know how the chain broke. And he wanted to know as well, but despite a proper investigation, the matter remained a mystery to everyone. We are not sure yet, he answered, and the boy was clearly unimpressed by his answer. Still, now that we are done with that, there is something that I need to give you, and Albus opened the drawer, took out a small stone, and placed it on the table. The Ravenclaw boy glanced at the stone, and his eyes widened as he recognized it. Is that? He gasped and Albus nodded. Yes, that is one of the Hallows, and there was a time that he had dreamt about possessing the 3 Hallows, and yet despite his youth, power, influence, and desperate search, the mythical items had continued to escape him. But now, when he desired them no more, they lay close to him such that he could gather all 3 of them in one single night he wished. The irony of the situation was not lost to him. And neither would it be lost upon the boy in front of him. The 3 Hallows represented his greatest failure and weakness, and despite having the chance of uniting them, Albus did not trust himself with the power, despite having fallen prey to their power. The Hallows are a mystery. Objects that hold unspeakable power, and while once I had dreamt of uniting them, I now know better that of all the people in this world, I am the least deserving of that honor and power, and that seemed to surprise the Ravenclaw, who began after a few seconds. I know of your hesitance when it comes to wielding such power, but if it is indeed Voldemort acting through Harry's body, then you need to stop him, and how was he to do that? Just as he had let him rise to power in these very halls? No. In the end, that opportunity was lost to him. Both then, and now. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that he himself shared much of the blame for Harry's current condition, that his own actions had led the young boy into his current state. With all that baggage and the doubt about Harry's current condition, he wondered if he would even be able to make the right choice, or more importantly, do what was necessary. There is no doubt in my mind by now that the person currently inhabiting Harry's body is indeed Tom. His words made the boy's eyes widen. Though I still remain confused and conflicted about what became of Harry himself. Is he alive? Is he dead? Does his soul still reside in his body, or have I failed the Potters once more? And there were so many questions. So, we need answers. You can search for them, and he shook his head. No, I am afraid the guilt of my actions clouds my judgment. Sadly, I believe myself incapable of carrying this burden, and so he reached out and put forward a memory vial on the table as well. I believe through this memory, and this stone, you should be able to obtain those answers, and what you decide to do afterwards is your choice, and the boy frowned. You want me to make that decision? Albus nodded, remembering Perinel's words. Yes, because if you are who you claim to be, my boy, then this will be the first of many burdens that you must carry, and the Ravenclaw boy was confused by his words. What do you mean by that? I believe I am not the best person to ask that question. There is someone who can guide you and help you in your decisions, someone who was both blessed and cursed with the same gift as you, and that caught him surprise. Are you telling me that there has been someone else like me? And he nodded. Yes. Who? He asked, and Albus looked him in the eye. I doubt that you have heard of her, but she was a witch born 600 years ago and helped in the creation of a magical marvel that remains a mystery to this day. Pernell Flamel, and he was surprised by the boy's words, though he was a Ravenclaw. How did you know? He asked, genuinely surprised by his accuracy. I always felt that there was more to the Flamels, but if she was indeed like me, then it makes more sense, and he wondered if the boy suspected their treachery as well, suspected about what they had done to create that magical marvel. Yes, she is quite eager to meet you, he said, and the boy nodded. So, you are leaving this matter in my hands, and he nodded sadly. Yes. And just as he was about to leave, he asked him another question. Did you use it? He asked, and Albus smiled as he told the boy a half-truth. No, he answered, but not because of a lack of trying, and as the door closed behind him, Albus raised his hand into the light, the subtle disillusionment that he had cast on it vanished, revealing a blackened hand, as his lips thinned. It seems like I remain as poor a student as always. Chapter 53. Cassius Black. Cassius hadn't had a moment to pause amidst the chaos in his life. The brewing of Astoria's potion was in its final stage, and just as that part of him was about to end, the headmaster had entrusted him with another great responsibility. The resurrection stone was small and cubical with the symbol of the Hallows inscribed onto it, and as he rolled it in between his fingers, it felt like a simple jewel, yet it was anything but that. He still had not watched the memories he had been entrusted with, for he remained more curious about the fact that he was not the only one in this world with his unique circumstances. That there had been others before him who had dealt with the same situation. Like Pernell Flamel, for instance. Cassius had read quite a bit about the Flamels, or at least as much as one could find out these days, and he had always been fascinated by them, or more specifically by the Philosopher's Stone that they had created. The stone was the stuff of legends, similar in uniqueness and importance to the Deathly Hallows, the Veil at the Ministry, the Founder's Treasures, and many other things whose origins and powers remained engulfed in mystery. Yet here were two people still alive who had done the impossible and had created a magical artifact that no other wizard or witch before or after them had been able to replicate. Since the dawn of time, wizards and witches had tried to create the stone to fulfill their desires. Some desired it for the wealth it offered, others wanted it for the immortality, and others still desired it for fame and the power it offered, yet in the 4,000 years of recorded history no wizard or witch had been able to do what the Flamels had done. Herpo, Peverils, Blacks, Gaunts, and even Helga Hufflepuff herself had all tried to create the stone, yet none had succeeded. In the end, after poring over nearly 24 books and diaries, Cassius had reached a straightforward conclusion in his life. Either the creation of the stone was a lie, or the more likely chance was that its creation was less dependent on the brilliance of the Flamels and more dependent on the circumstances surrounding them and the time in which they had lived. Upon reading a bit more about the specific time during which they created the stone, one thing that stood out was the Black Death. Herpo, Peverils, and the Blacks were no saints, but even at their most nefarious, no wizard or witch had ever killed so many people as the Black Death, and so he wondered if it was somehow connected with the creation of the stone. But he had always thought that the secret would elude him, but now in his hands lay a chance to confirm his suspicion. And so, with a final sigh, Cassius twisted the stone thrice in his hands, and upon closing his eyes, focused on the name and form of one Pernell Flamel, and even before he had opened his eyes, a soothing, aged voice called out to him. I have been waiting for you to call on me, and Cassius opened his eyes and saw a woman standing in front of him, or rather, a ghost of a woman. And he was a bit surprised at her appearance, for he had expected an old and frail woman, yet the ghost in front of him seemed to be in her 30s or 40s, and not a day older. You are Pernell Flamel, he said, and the woman nodded, a smile blossoming on her face. Yes, she had long curly hair, and somehow, even though she was a mercurial white and black, he could tell that they were brown once, and that her eyes had hints of dark red in them, and that she smelled of oranges. It was strange, and his mind wondered if all this was the stone's doing, or was it something special about her. You were expecting me to be older. And it was as if she had read his mind, and he admitted his own thoughts as the woman smiled warmly at him. Yes. Well, I do hope I have not disappointed, and she was not what he had expected her to be. But you must understand, time does not really age a person's body, it is the soul that ages, and it took him an instant to make the connection. And the Philosopher's Stone stops the soul from aging, and she saw those mercurial eyes narrow, as that smile stiffened. He did mention that you were quite brilliant, and again, he was surprised that she somehow knew about him. Who? He asked. The love of my life, but how was he able to communicate with her? The stone. He guessed. But didn't you destroy it? And she did not answer him, which told him that it was a lie. We wanted to. Or rather yet, he wanted to, and her expression turned grim as she gazed into his eyes. But, there was much that we needed to do. That stone is not just our legacy, it is a burden as well, one that I must pass on to someone else. But I had grown tired of carrying this burden years ago. So even now, 600 years later, he offered to carry it for himself and wait until a successor appeared to carry it forward, and Cassius was silent before he asked another question. And you believe I am that successor? After a few seconds, she answered with a question of her own. Yes, I do, because even though I am dead, I can see it, and those eyes lit up and glowed slightly, as she continued. You are not as young as your body would have me believe, Cassius Black, and the words stilled her. But don't worry. Your secret is safe with me. I have also asked Albus to keep it to himself, and he won't share it with me, she added, and Cassius's mind whirred with 1,000 questions, and perhaps he might even ask her all of them. Did you ask the headmaster to leave Harry's fate in my hands? And she seemed a bit taken aback by his words. Why would you think that? Initially, it had been a hunch. Albus Dumbledore was not the kind of man to push on such a responsibility onto someone else, at least not without good reason. And despite raking his mind, he could think of no good reason why the man would push such a massive task onto him. Unless he was asked to. It's just a hunch, he replied, and the woman did not lie. Yes, I did, and that confirmed his hunch. Why? He asked. Because from what I can tell, this is no ordinary task. It is a monumental decision that could shape history itself, and if you are to be my successor, then you must be able to make these decisions on your own, and she looked away. You must decide for yourself whether a part of Harry still lives on inside that body, or is he gone, and if so, will you try to revive him? Her voice grew sterner as she told of the same question. Or will you kill both the body and soul, putting an end to the problem of this Dark Lord once and for all, and he knew of his options, knew of the weight of that decision. So, this is a test. And he did not like it that she was making this matter out to be so trivial. In a way, yes. But it is not to judge you, for there are no right or wrong decisions here, and it was getting too late, and he had to rush back to the dorm soon. Well, speaking of that, just one more question before I go. And she nodded. Ask away. She encouraged, it is not as if I have much to do. You were the one who created the stone, weren't you? 0000. Tracy Davis. The Yule Ball, and the words of the Transfiguration Professor immediately set her heart racing as Professor McGonagall addressed all of the fourth years gathered in the giant classroom. And she had wondered when they would make the announcement, and the day was finally here. Immediately, she wanted to jump out in joy, but she held herself back as the professor continued. The ball has been a part of the Triwizard Tournament for centuries, where students from each of the three schools gather in a great hall for a night of well-mannered and frivolity, and she scoffed, as she whispered to Daphne. As if there is any such thing, and despite its celebrations, Hogwarts's Christmas celebrations were rather lackluster, at least compared to what she was used to. The pure-blood high society did not celebrate Christmas, but celebrated Samhain, and many of the old families still held balls and galas to display their wealth. Compared to those places, Hogwarts celebrations held little charm. As representatives of the host school, I want each and every one of you to put your best foot forward. And she leaned closer to Daphne once more as the professor turned her steely gaze towards the other side. I can bet a 10 galleon that the frivolity will be anything but well-mannered, and Daphne nudged her arm, as the professor's steely gaze turned towards their side as the caretaker Argus Filch set up an old gramophone on the table behind the Transfiguration Mistress. Both figuratively and literally, because the Yule Ball is first and foremost a dance, and the professor had intricately walked to the other side, and was not standing in front of a very bored-looking Cassius as she addressed the boy directly. All champions must attend the ball, willing and unwilling, and all the eyes in the hall turned towards Cassius at that moment as the professor chastised the Ravenclaw champion whose unwillingness to partake in the tournament was known to all. And as he tried to open his mouth, she cut in quickly. No arguments, Mr. Black. I will not have you besmirch the good name of this school on my watch. You will attend the ball or you shall prepare yourself to face my wrath, and I need not remind you that you still have 4 years still left in your schooling under me, and that was the first time they were hearing her make a threat, and it sent a shiver down her spine, as Cassius was forced to nod. Understood, Professor, and though he had not flinched even in the face of a dragon, Professor McGonagall was far scarier. She forced him to bow down to her commands as she strode towards the center of the hall. Now, perhaps I could have a show of hands from the students here who know the basics of dance, and many hands went up, including her own and Daphne's, as the professor scanned the crowd. Not so many, she heard her whisper as she gave a nod. For those unaware, I shall have a pair of you put out an example, and she scanned the crowd and smiled as she called out the first name. Mr. Black, and she saw Cassius stand up reluctantly, his face pale for some reason, though rather than turning towards him, the professor turned to their side. And, Miss Greengrass, and she heard many whispers and murmurs, as Daphne gulped down nervously. Me? Yes, Miss Greengrass, unless you have changed your name like Mr. Black here, and the professor was clearly angry with Cassius and took another jibe at him, as a few students chuckled, but one glance from the black-haired boy was enough to silence them. The reason for it was obvious enough, for his actions in the tournament had reflected poorly on the school, a place the professor held in the highest regard. In the end, Daphne strode to the center of the hall as the professor turned towards the caretaker. Filch, if you will, and the caretaker turned on the music as Cassius and Daphne took their respective positions, each of them familiar with each other's quirks and habits because of years upon years of repetition. They moved together in unison, and with every passing second, the whispers and murmurs began to die down as Cassius spun Daphne around the hall in his arms. Despite being clad in their uniforms, their performance mesmerized everyone, and even those unfamiliar with the intricacies of the art could tell that this was not normal. And only when the music stopped, and a few students coughed, did the professor remember that this was supposed to be a teaching moment. Yes, the professor shook her head. That was quite a brilliant performance, and indeed it was, and it was not her first witnessing it. As much as they would deny it, Cassius and Daphne were people built for one another, they were born in the same world, each carrying the burden of legacy on their shoulders. But the sad truth was that they were both blind to their feelings, or at least had been. Daphne had finally found in herself the courage to accept the lingering feelings she had always buried deep inside herself. Yet, Cassius still remained oblivious, or better yet, too preoccupied to recognize them. And as much as she wanted to blame him, she could not. They'd grown up together, speaking each other's silences before they even had words, and that much proximity often created a blind spot, as it had now. Now the performance from an experienced pair can be as mesmerizing as this one, but even if one of the two partners knows the basics of the dance, then they can lead their partner and help them along, and she scanned the crowd once more. Miss Granger, why don't you step forward? And her heart sank, as she turned towards the former Gryffindor girl who had rejoined them this year as the brown-haired girl stood up. And have a go with Mr. Black for a second demonstration, and she saw the girl gulp down nervously as she opened her mouth and apologized. I am afraid I cannot dance today, Professor. I sprained my ankle earlier and the matron cautioned me about doing anything too arduous for the day. 0000. In the forest, Igor Karkaroff knelt on his knees as he apologized profusely to his master. Forgive me, master. I have failed you. The boy still lives, and fear gripped his heart for he knew of the punishment that awaited him, and despite being the headmaster of Drumstrang, he knew that in front of the Dark Lord, he was but a child. After all, what chance did he stand against the wizard who had defeated death itself? Of course, you failed, the master added. I already knew that the stunt with the dragon could not kill that boy. I just wanted him to suffer, but I did not expect that he would be able to fight a dragon on his own, and neither had he, or anyone else. And to think that he already suspects me, and the master laughed. It seems like I have found myself a worthy foe. Chapter 54. Cassius Black. The Yule Ball fever had swallowed up the entire school, as Cassius found himself conflicted in 1,000 choices. Despite it being weeks since the headmaster gave him the memory and the stone, he still had not tried to confirm Harry's survival. He had worked out how to, but in the end, for some reason, he hesitated. He was lying, though. He knew the reason. All it would take is 3 turns. Added the whisper of Pernell from the front, and the resurrection stone was truly mysterious. It did not bring back the person in his entirety, nor did it simply show you a person's soul. No, what it brought back was something in between. It allowed them to carry memories, experiences, even perform magic, and so she knew better than most the dilemma that he faced. I know, he answered, and even if he did not view the memories, he could confirm his suspicion all by simply turning the stone thrice in his hands, and call for Harry just as he had called for her. One trick. One would answer all his questions. But he hesitated. And not just in this. His life seemed to be full of hesitations as of late. Yet you still stop yourself from knowing the truth, Pernell teased, and he sighed. You must also know why. He added, and the older woman nodded. And it was comforting for him to know that he could share his burdens with someone, that there was someone there to help him, guide him in these unique and troubling circumstances without passing judgment. Because you wonder if you would be able to do what is necessary, if there is a slight chance that Harry Potter still lives, and indeed. Limited in power and confined to a teenager's body as he may be, Voldemort was not an opponent he could underestimate. Even though he probably lacked many of the enhancements and buffs he had gained over the years through rituals and other artifacts. He was limited in his capacity to wield magic by the limitations of Harry Potter's body, that still made Tom Riddle quite a formidable opponent. Cassius was not even sure that he could defeat him, let alone subdue him. But killing him, that was entirely different matter. But if he knew that Harry still lived, that his actions or spells could somehow lead to the death of an innocent boy, would he still be able to fight with reckless abandon and disregard? He believed the answer was no. So, he hesitated. But he would have to make a decision one way or another. Let's talk about the other issue then, the Flamel Witch added in a sing-song voice as she flew through his study, and plopped down in front of him on the sofa, as he rolled his eyes. The ball. And much like the rest of the school, the Flamel Witch was rather excited about it for some reason. I can't believe that you are excited for a ball. Given your age, you must have participated in like thous. But before he could finish, he winced as his arm stung. Ouch. He rubbed his arm and looked up, and saw the older woman eyeing him. You should know better than to speak about a woman's age, and he rolled his eyes. You are dead already, and she huffed. That does not change the fact that I am a woman, and in their short time together, he had come to learn much about the witch Pernell Flamel. And despite her age, she had maintained a childish disposition. And that the stone allowed her to share his own experiences, and though he was quick to shut that down, she still had ways of knowing nearly everything. The scorned love or a lifelong friend, she dramatized his choices, and honestly, things were theatrical. Honestly, I would much rather skip the whole thing, but Professor McGonagall had given him quite a dire warning and he did not want to piss her off any more than he already had, especially given that he was to spend 3 more years at the school. You are such a bore. She nagged. And you are such a good dancer. I myself was quite good actually, and it was because of me that Beau's Batons had dance as a compulsory class, and he did not know that, nor did he really need to know that. Still, you have to make a choice, and he had to. Hermione's actions had hurt him deeply, and even if he was willing to forgive it all, the simple nature of the circumstances meant that their future did not lay together. Not after what she had done and where she had moved. Not after she left and left him with so much unanswered. But in this whole scenario, Cassius may have been blind to the affections of some other people, and only recently did he begin to see the hints that he had missed for so long. Daphne and him were childhood friends. They had literally known each other even before they had begun to talk, and yet never had they tried to be anything more than friends. She was the rock he could depend on, a reliable friend, but in these recent days, he began to feel that she wanted to be more than that. That a part of her wanted to be more than just friends. Are you sure about this? He asked Pernell, and the aged woman sighed and nodded once more. Yes, I could bet my entire fortune that the girl likes you, and she was 600 years old, so she did have the experience. But why would she never give me a hint before? I am not the smartest when it comes to these things, but I am not so oblivious, he defended himself and the woman nodded. Perhaps, she could not, she suggested, and he frowned. Why? That girl? Her sister is cursed, right? And indeed, he had told her about Astoria as well and even shown her the cure they had prepared for her, which would be complete after the Samhain. Yes, he agreed. Perhaps, she was saving herself for that. She had hoped to use her marriage, or herself as a bargaining tool to find that cure. Maybe she had never really had the time to think of herself, and she also knew about his affection for Hermione. She may have held herself back for that. Daphne Greengrass. The Ice Princess of Slytherin. She had earned that moniker for good reason, and it was not entirely out of the realm of possibilities that Perinel's words were true. Just do it, Pernell advised softly. But what if we are wrong? He asked, and she shrugged. Then so be it. I can assure you, years later you two would be laughing about this whole thing with your friends and children, and indeed, that may be true. But if you don't, and you let this wither away, both of you will regret this for all of your lives, and so he nodded. I will think about it, and she nodded. Then I believe my work here is done, and just as she began to vanish away, she added one last thing. And do the other thing as well, Cassius. Waiting will not change the reality, and with that she shimmered away, as Cassius was left alone in the room once more, as he thought of her words. In the end, after half an hour, he reached for the stone once more, and twisted it thrice in his hands as he had done so for days now, and closed his eyes as he thought of a young, green-eyed boy. Harry Potter. He whispered, and yet as he opened his eyes, he found the room empty and turned towards the memory vial and whispered. Well, I guess I have no choice now. 0000. Daphne Greengrass. She had never felt so nervous in her life before. In her mind her life had always been perfectly mapped out. Graduate from Hogwarts and then find the cure for Astoria's sickness no matter what. That was it. That was her life's entire plan, and she had never dared to think beyond that. But now she could, and as she did she began to dream of a future life, and in all her dreams she found someone besides her, someone who had been by her side for years. And as much pain as it brought her, she had decided to take a chance. I am going to do it, she declared to Tracy, as they walked towards the library. What? Her friend asked, and Daphne. I am going to ask him out myself, and it was beyond the norm and tradition, but she did not have it in her heart to suffer another heartbreak. That dance, that they had done at the professor's command, had just confirmed what she had already known. That she liked Cassius, and it should have been obvious enough to her, but the duty to her sister had bound her heart and mind, and now with those locks gone, Daphne believed that she deserved a semblance of happiness for herself. That she had to take a chance. No, Tracy disagreed. That's a terrible idea, and it was, but she could see no other path. Just give him a little more time, she suggested as she had been for days now. But what if he chooses her again? What if? She asked, and her friend had no answer. She is gone, Daphne, and Cassius may be blind, but he is no fool. I think he has caught the hints, but even if he had caught them, what was stopping him then? I just want to know, she whispered as they reached the gates of the library. He was there, waiting for them. Hey, he greeted them, as Tracy eyed her, but before she could say anything. Tracy, do you mind holding the spot for us? I need to talk with Daphne for a second, and Tracy gave her a look before she smiled. Sure, and she went off, leaving her alone with him as he motioned for them to move towards the gardens to the side. So, what do you want to talk about? And immediately she berated herself for her chilly tone. But she was like this, she had always been like this, and did not know how to act like other girls. Well, I just wanted to ask you a question, he said, as they came to a halt at the pillars and stood face to face against one another. He looked her in the eyes, and that dark gaze had never felt darker, as she heard him sigh and whisper. I am a fool, and she felt that she may have misheard, but hope began to bubble in her heart. What? And then she saw him shake his head. Why didn't you ever say anything? And it was as if the world had come crashing down. When it came to the two of them, they could read each other's minds, and so she knew exactly what he was talking about. What was I to say? She replied as her eyes grew heavier. I had never thought that I would ever have such an opportunity. I had resigned myself to becoming a bargaining chip for Astoria's future, but he had freed her of that fate, and of 100 other worries. And you were in love with someone else, and she would never dare interfere in that. He had simply done too much for her, so she could never put his happiness in jeopardy. But now, things were different. And so she felt the bustle around them halt, as Cassius smiled and knelt down on one knee, much like a prince in those animated movies he had shown her. Daphne Ophelia Greengrass, would you please accompany me to the ball? He asked, and she chuckled at his theatrics, and heard a few boys nearly scream. The Ice Princess can laugh. Fuck. The world might be ending. Pinch me. And she took the offered hand, as he gave him a nod. Yes, I will. 0000. In the distance, a brown-haired girl watched it all happen from the corner of the garden and immediately turned around and ran away. Although she was happy for her two friends, it did not lessen the pain from the heartbreak she had suffered. In that moment, she ran back to the dorms where she had felt the safest. And as she lay there hours later, a familiar face came and joined her, spoke nothing, and simply accompanied her until later, and asked her the same question. Chapter 55. Cassius Black. Cassius stood in the Dada classroom and watched as their new professor gave an enthusiastic lecture on the mysterious and powerful patroness charm, repeating the very words he had spoken in his own class. But the students in front of him were different, wearing the red and green of Gryffindor and Slytherin, respectively, as the black sheep of the Black family made the final offer. And all those who can perform the spell will be exempt from all assignments and tests, including the finals. And students gasped at the offer, as the man smiled wildly. Now, I have it on good authority from an old friend of mine that one of you here can perform the spell, and then he turned towards the bespectacled boy, as his eyes lit up. Harry, why don't you show the class how it's done? The son of Lily and James hesitated before he slowly rose up amidst a backdrop of whispers and envious gazes. Unlike Harry of before, he walked with confidence and intent as he took to the stage and whipped out his wand, frowning as he rubbed his hands on the holly as the boy whipped it in a circle and used the chant. Expecto Patronum. But instead of the familiar stag or even a wisp of light, the world remained the same, and a few Slytherins chuckled as the boy who lived failed in front of their eyes. But one glance from Harry was enough to silence them, as Sirius prompted him to try again. Why don't you have another go? He offered, and Harry, or more specifically, this molded and body-devouring form of Tom, tried again. Expecto Patronum. And again the wand refused to obey his command, and all that came out of it were a few wisps, but he had not missed their dark nature and color. Sirius's face dropped at the sight of his godson's failure, but he was a teacher now and had to be fair. Well, perhaps I was a bit too optimistic about this class's potential. And so Harry walked away, his face contorted with frustration and rage, as the black-haired man turned towards the rest of the class once more. Anyone else here who wants to have a go? And while others hesitated, 2 new hands went up immediately from the Slytherin house, which surprised the Dada professor. Miss Greengrass, and Davies. It took him a second to reel back his surprise as he beckoned to the stage. Sure, come and have a go, and Tracy bounced forth first, as Daphne followed after her friend as Tracy whipped out her wand, and closed her eyes. Expecto Patronum. And at those words an all too familiar hawk shot out of her wand, and caught as it flew over the classroom, but as the Slytherin brunette jumped up in joy, and the eyes of the entire class followed the misty white creature, he was looking at Harry Potter. The boy was curled in his chair, gripping his head, and Cassius walked to his side as the hawk whipped past him once more, and though unclear, he could notice those lips moving, as Harry bit his lip. Well, that was quite impressive, voiced out the Dada professor, as Tracy jumped to the side. Now. But before he could say anything more, Daphne Greengrass took out her wand and said those same words. Expecto Patronum. And as Cassius turned towards the girl, expecting that all too familiar butterfly, but what he saw made him still, along with the rest of the classroom, for what shot out of her wand was no simple butterfly. No. It was a 4-legged creature, one he was all too familiar with. Its head was adorned with a spiraling horn, and it galloped across the classroom, and the surprise of the class was shared by the girl herself and her best friend as the unicorn halted beside him, as if she could sense its presence. That's a unicorn, Sirius murmured, all acing his voice, as the animal stared him in the eye before vanishing into a thin cloud of white smoke. Having a magical creature as a corporeal patroness is extremely rare and a hallmark of a powerful wizard, added Sirius, oblivious to the surprise of the blonde girl, while Tracy eyed her in desperation. Congratulations, Miss Green. And before Sirius could finish, Daphne had walked out of the classroom, with Tracy following her as Sirius screamed after them. Wait. And with that, he felt himself waking up from a dream, as he pulled his face out of the pensieve, mind-whirring with emotions as he cursed himself for his blindness. He plopped down on the chair, as his mind wandered towards Daphne and the shift in her patroness, and only a great emotional change could bring about such a thing. How could I miss this for all these years? He whispered to himself. Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, and he nearly screamed in fear as he looked up and saw the ghostly form of Pernell floating around the room. Merlin's beard. He cursed, as the being scoffed. He did not really have a beard, you know, she answered, and that was not the point. How long have you been here? He asked, and the woman shrugged. For 600 years, and as he delved more and more into the intricacies of the resurrection stone, he found it more and more puzzling. By Perinel's own words, the stone was quasi-philosopher's stone, and had been created by a wizard using magics now lost to times itself. The stone did not truly bring back the dead, at least not from what he theorized. No, what it brought back was a remnant of the dead person. Years from now, science would uncover that every action, or every movement by a person, left behind a permanent trace in the quantum mechanics of the world, and his theory was that the stone simply used these remnants to reconstruct a person's conscience. But even then, Perinel's behavior was rather odd, for she was unlike the rest of the people he had called. The aged witch had the ability to bypass the stone and read his thoughts despite his continuous use of occlumency. How did you appear? He asked, and the witch simply shrugged. The more pressing matter is how the hell did you miss that your best friend was in love with you? And she was trying to shift away their discussion, and he let her. I don't know. She never gave me a hint, and if she did, he never caught it. Men are such oblivious creatures. You did well in asking her to the ball. She added, wafting through the air, as she continued to advise him. I like you two as a pair, and he rolled his eyes. You are not a matchmaker, and honestly, I think I might have found a way to save Harry, and the hint was in front of him. The patroness charm, she whispered, and he nodded. The spell has an effect on him. I think it might be the key to saving Harry and bringing down Voldemort, and she nodded. How fitting, whispered Pernell. Why? Because there is no better reflection of one's soul than a patroness charm. I find it rather fitting that the spell could help you separate the two intertwined souls, and in a way, it seemed like the killing curse. But the thing is, the spell is quite obscure, and apart from its application and chant, there is little information available about it, and Pernell nodded. I know, because that was exactly how its creator intended it to be, and he frowned. The patroness charm deals with the soul, and any magic that delves into the mysteries of the soul and human life can be weaponized rather easily, and he was realizing as much. Then what do I do? And she smiled. The answer is rather simple, she whispered, and it clicked for him as well. The stone, he gasped. I just need to figure out the name of the wizard who created the spell, and then try to summon them, he voiced out, lost in his head as Pernell added. You need not search for, I already know them, and he looked up. Who? He asked. The very man whose legacy hangs around your neck. Salazar Slytherin. 0000. Tracy Davis. Ever since she had first met the duo of Daphne and Cassius, Tracy had always thought that the pair was something special. Cassius, at first glance, was a jovial, irresponsible child who seemed much more concerned about enjoying his life, while Daphne seemed the exact opposite. The Ice Queen of Slytherin was too sharp, and too serious, and had little to no desire for any pleasure in her life. The truth, though, was hidden away from everyone, for the jovial Cassius was one of the hardest working and devoted wizards she knew, who fought a dozen battles at once while the smile on his face did not dim for a second. Daphne, though may act all indifferent and cold, but the girl longed to dream, longed for a life of her own, yet her love for her sister had made her shackle her heart. The two danced around one another, supporting each other in their endeavors, and her belief had taken a hit last year when she had learned of Cassius's interest in Hermione, and she had begun to doubt her instinct. But she was right. Cassius may have liked Hermione, but he cared for Daphne. He cared for her more than anyone ever had, and because of that, shackles around her heart began to break, and as Hermione left Britain, leaving behind a deep wound of betrayal, Cassius finally found himself the perfect match. Why didn't you say anything? He confronted her as he pulled her to the side in the gardens. It was not my secret to tell, and her doubts had turned into belief the day she had witnessed Daphne's new patroness, and how familiar it was to Cassius's very own, but the blonde had made her promise that she would not reveal it to him. You were our friend, Cassius lamented, regretting his blindness as Tracy shrugged. And you have no idea how frustrating it was watching you both dance around one another, both too lost in their own worries and world, facing their own problems with no support from the world except the one they gave each other. Still, I need a favor from you, and she smirked, for it was rare of him to come to her. Ah, but it's gonna cost you, and given that he was the inheritor of the Black Fortune, she had no intention of holding back. Sure, he agreed, and she smirked. So, what do you need? I need Daphne's measurements, and her eyes widened at those words, and she knew that Cassius could be quite a romantic, but this was something else. Ooh. She whistled, as he tried his hardest to hide away his embarrassment. You are going to get her a dress for the ball, and he nodded, and she did not know he knew much about this stuff at all. Do you even know any designers? And his smile dulled. You forget who my mother was, and that was a mistake indeed. So, who do you plan on asking? She asked, so that he may not make a mistake. He reached into his pocket, and gave her a small slip of paper, and as she unfurled it, her eyes widened. You are going to get Johnny Versace to make something for her. She screamed her head off at his audacity. Yeah, and she, like most witches, knew very well just how costly such a thing was, and yet he did not seem to care. Just get me the measurements by the end of the day, and she shook her head. Not so fast, Black. Not so fast, she pulled on his sleeve, stopping him from jumping away. You don't just get to leave after dropping news like that, and she smiled wildly and realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her, and that she would be a fool to not take advantage of it. Since you're already splurging on one dress, what's one more? Chapter 56. Ronald Weasley. The entire school now stood outside the Great Hall, dressed in their finest robes. Ron had never felt more embarrassed or out of place in his life as he stood there in his second-hand robes, waiting for his date. He could see the Slytherin house members eyeing him and smiling as he tried to push down his embarrassment, while Harry stood beside him clad in fine new robes. He felt a bit jealous seeing his friend's lavish robes, and the little changes that Ron had noticed throughout the year had never felt more obvious than today, for this Harry was way different than the boy who had met him at Hogwarts Express. It was subtle at first, but Sirius's presence had begun to change his old friend, and though they remained friends, but he did not remain his sole friend any longer. Harry had found himself new friends, including McLaggen, Dean, and even Susan Bones. Even now, though they stood side by side, Harry was busy chatting away with McLaggen as Ron tried to hide away his embarrassment. But in the end, despite his struggles, Ron prided himself on being his first friend. Harry's really changed, Neville whispered as he tried to tie himself a tie, and Ron nodded. Yeah, he has, and now he wore his glasses less and less, and even now he was using an artifact to correct his vision, dumping his new glasses as they waited outside the hall. Well, good for him, and indeed, it was good for him. Still, I heard that he got rejected by Hermione, and Ron stiffened at that, for he had been the one to let it slip, even when Harry had asked him to keep it a secret. SHHH, he pinched Neville's arm, stopping him from saying anything more. What? Neville asked as he winced in pain. He asked me not to tell anyone. And of course he would. It was a great embarrassment for anyone to be rejected by Hermione, though Ron himself had faced a slew of rejections himself, including one rather embarrassing one from the Bosbaton champion herself. Why? Neville asked, and he wondered himself, but Harry had grown to care about many things now. Like how he looked, how he ate and how he dressed. Things that had never mattered to him before. Suddenly, the hall shifted as Ron heard a few girls gasp as they would for him in his dreams, but the object of their awe was someone else. Look at him. Damn. He heard a few murmurs and turned back and saw the reason for the ruckus, as his mood soured immediately. Dressed in an impeccable, pitch-black suit was the current object of fascination for every girl at Hogwarts, and his black hair and eyes only added to his overall presence as he waded through the sea of girls, and headed towards the door. It seems like you have some sense at least, Professor McGonagall's voice broke him out of his stupor as the Transfiguration Mistress gazed at the Ravenclaw champion. Champions! Champions! She then began to call out as she cleared up the space from the front of the hall, and his attention was easily caught by the rest of the group where Cedric was paired up with another Ravenclaw girl. In contrast, Beauxbatons champion had chosen Roger Davies as her partner. Lucky Ravenclaws, he cursed, as he grew angry at that Ravenclaw senior for having what he could only ever dream of. Crumbs got no one? Neville asked. Seems. But before he could finish, the Drumstrang champion moved towards the stairs as all eyes turned towards the stairs, and even Ron found himself stunned at the sight in front of him. Is that? Neville gasped as it took him a few seconds to recognize the person coming down the stairs. Hermione. And despite sharing a class for around 4 years, he couldn't recognize her. She wore a pink dress, with the silk forming several flowers and swirls all around. She looked absolutely gorgeous, and he regretted not having asked her out, and he could see Harry's eyes narrow as Victor Krum stepped forward and took her arm. Her smile stiffened as she looked up, as the Bulgarian keeper led her to the entrance, and she saw more than 24 eyes all turned towards Harry as Hermione walked past them, as the Transfiguration Professor turned towards the last champion. I do hope that you were able to get yourself a date, Mr. Black. And then she appeared. And the rumor had spread far and wide that someone had finally been able to melt the frozen heart of the Ice Queen of Slytherin, and as Daphne Greengrass walked down the stairs, everyone stiffened for there was a girl that all the boys at school had revered and feared equally. She wore a black, simpler gown, one that showed her back, and it perfectly matched the black of her date's dress. As Cassius led her to the entrance, the Transfiguration Professor finally let out a sigh of relief. The first dance is reserved for the champions. 0000. Daphne Greengrass. Daphne and Cassius had danced over 1,000 times by now. He had been her designated partner for 100 such events by now, yet this dance was unlike anything they had done before. The steps were the same, the movements routine, the music familiar enough, but their bodies hugged each other like they never had. This was no longer routine. The Great Hall itself had been transformed into an elaborate ballroom with pearly white walls and shimmering white lights that lingered over the champions as they glided across the stage, amidst the hum of a slow, romantic ballad. The blacks of their dresses blended into one another, contrasting against the white of the stage and the walls, as he spun her around before wrapping her arm around her waist, staring intensely into her eyes as he pulled her closer than ever and whispered. Have I mentioned how gorgeous you look? He teased as she rolled her eyes. Just a dozen times, and the way his eyes were glued to her was an answer enough to what he thought of her dress and herself. Then you wouldn't mind me saying it a dozen more, and she shook her head, as the music came to an end. Then the music shifted, the rest of the school joined in, and this one dance alone had been tiring enough for her, and he saw that in an instant and slowly led her to the edge of the dance floor. Do you want to sit down? He asked, as they slowed down to a simple waltz, as the rest of the school joined them on the dance floor, and they were the first champions to sit down, as Daphne's eyes scanned the crowd as she eyed her brunette friend dancing in the arms of a somewhat nervous Blaise Zabinai. I never knew that Tracy and Zabinai were a thing, Cassius added, and neither did she, and the way Tracy was smiling was an answer enough that this was no simple fling for her. Neither did I, and her dress sparkled in the same way as hers, and was rather distinct in its style, as they should be given their designer. You must have spent a fortune on the dresses, she asked, and Cassius raised a brow as he gave his usual reply. I have 1,000 problems, my dear, but money isn't one, and his American accent was as good as always as she shook her head. Still, Tracy had spilled the beans on how she had extorted quite an exuberant price for this gift, and much like a dozen other things, he had not hesitated for even a second in paying it. Cassius himself wore a matching black dress, elegant and straightforward, as always. Still, I don't think I have complimented you on your looks, and Cassius had always had a rather impeccable fashion sense, no matter how much he may try to act the fool. Even now, his matte black suit stood out amongst the crowd, as he flagged down 2 glasses of butterbeer for them. You haven't, he teased, and she nodded. And so for his constant teasing, she held her tongue, making him give her an aghast look as they were joined on their table with a somewhat familiar couple. And even before Daphne had tried to avoid letting her glance linger on her, but she could evade her eyes no more as Hermione and Victor Krum approached their table, the Bulgarian seeker unaware of the history between his date and Cassius. The Drumstrang champion greeted Cassius, as Hermione stood there awkwardly, and she saw the former Gryffindor girl gazing in her date's direction with some semblance of longing and regret, as Daphne slowly tapped him on the shoulder. Could you get me something? She asked, and he was quick to get the hint as Victor politely asked her the same question, as the 2 boys left them alone to talk about their problems. You should dress up more often, she advised, and the brown-haired girl blushed. Well, it's all thanks to Fleur, she said, pointing towards the Vila champion from Beauxbatons who had captivated the eyes and nearly half the boys in the room. Come sit, she said as the 2 of them sat side by side, their gazes following their respective dates, who seemed to be having a good time together in one corner of the room. I won't apologize, Daphne was the first to break the ice, and she saw Hermione stiffen before the girl added. You don't have to, she whispered. Some things simply aren't meant to be, Hermione added, and the girl was clearly in pain, but Daphne had to accept her strength to sit here beside her. I just hope that we can still be friends, she asked, and despite what any sane person would say, Daphne nodded as she smiled at Hermione. Of course, and she did that only because of trust, not in herself but in the boy standing in the far corner of the room, laughing with the Bulgarian seeker. And so, the conversation turned to other things like school and subjects, and it was only the arrival of Tracy that made them stop as her brunette friend jumped in with a rather serious question. So should I bring swords, or drinks? Tracy asked nervously as she eyed them both sitting down with one another, and the girl had helped mediate this whole affair between them and had been richly rewarded because of that. What about your hidden boyfriend? Daphne asked, seeing through the girl's ploy to deflect away from her secret. Which secret boyfriend? Tracy continued to pretend, as she smiled wildly. The very one that was flying across the room with you, and it was Hermione who finished her words. A certain Blaise Zabin, perhaps. And as the students all danced and enjoyed the ball, a certain green-eyed boy reclused himself to a corner, his green eyes blazed with red sparks as he eyed a brown-haired girl dancing in the arms of the black boy, his teeth grinding in rage and his snarling anger evident. You dare turn down me? He whispered angrily, remembering all those stares from earlier and how he had been insulted. You mud-blood. And the slur stirred something inside him, a reaction, anger, but the red sparks grew darker as he put down this rebellion and made a promise in that moment. You will pay for this. He promised as he vanished from the hall, all by himself, even as his date searched for him. You will pay for humiliating me. Chapter 57. I still cannot believe you fell for the trap despite knowing about it, Nicholas chastised him as a teacher would a student. It had been a long time since he had treated him like that, as the aged wizard scampered through his tiny home picking up potions and vials, as he tried to help Albus ameliorate the curse on his hand. It was simply too tempting a prize, Albus admitted, his eyes distant with memory. Albus Dumbledore had always been fascinated by the Resurrection Stone, and its powers, and despite knowing of the curse lingering on the ring, he had not been able to keep himself at bay. Perhaps it was fate that compelled me to reach for it, and Nicholas scoffed, as he smacked his head with a book before he put a cauldron on fire. Do not blame your fallacies on fate, and he was indeed too old for making excuses. Still, those eyes looked into his. You do know that there is a simpler solution for it. The elixir. But Albus shook his head before the alchemist could eke out the rest of the words. No, he said firmly, especially now that he knew the true ingredient of the stone. The Flamels had made their choice, but Albus did not have the heart to live for centuries by using the purest thing in the entire world. I don't condemn you or Pernell. But I want nothing to do with the stone, and his old teacher's eyes dimmed at his words, before he gave him a subtle nod. I can only slow it down, Albus, he reminded him, and Albus knew that as well. I know, and he was ready for what came after. He had been ready for it for some time now. I no longer fear death as I once did. Back then, he had been young and in love. I shall greet it as an old friend. 0000. Cassius Malfoy. The days after the Yule Ball went by like a blur, and soon enough, it was time for the second task of the Triwizard Tournament. He had also finished the potion for Astoria and planned on bringing it all up to Daphne soon. Now, with his evenings vacant once more, he could finally focus more on his hairy problem. And so, they were given the orientation as last time, and the details of the task were just as he had expected. Not that they mattered to him, and as Ludo Bagman finished the explanation, they were all sent to the edge of the Black Lake while the students all cheered from the stands. Did you get my message? Asked Fleur as she stood beside him, and the Vila had been rather generous in sending him the clue for the task through Hermione, not that it mattered. Yes, and I must say I am grateful for your consideration, she added, despite knowing of his intentions and being in the last place. She had shown great spirit in trying to even the playing field. Are you not going to participate again? Asked Cedric, and he shrugged. I have no interest in the tournament, he declared as Cedric sighed. You do know half the stands are cheering for you now, and indeed, after the show during the first task where he had single-handedly brought down a dragon, the boos had turned into cheers and he could spot even a few banners in the stands in his support. You could at least try, Fleur suggested. I just don't want to make you guys look bad, and it made the three of them roll their eyes, as the Drumstrang champion chimed in. Well, it is your choice, and given that he was the top scorer in the last stage, the shot was fired, indicating the beginning of the second task, and he was the first to jump forward as the upper half of his body transfigured into a shark. You heard them, if we do not rescue the hostages within an hour, we could lose them, Fleur added in concern, as a minute later the cannon was fired a second time and Cedric jumped into the water. They are bluffing, he declared, and her eyes narrowed. Are you willing to risk your most precious person just on that? That cut deep, but he did not want to play along with this farce. Yes, I am, and the cannon was fired a third time, but Cassius did not move, as he simply sat down as Dean spoke away. And it seems like our Ravenclaw champion's protest continues. And the crowd booed now once more, as Cassius raised a brow. Well, he has shown us all that he is quite capable. But he continues his protest to show us his innocence. And the cannon sounded off for the last time, as Fleur whipped up her wand, as a bubble formed around her head. And the Bosbaton champion is away. And she jumped into the water body as Cassius simply sat there waiting for the hour to pass, as Dean commented away. Man. We believe you. Can we just get another display of magic from you? He pleaded, as Cassius shook his head, and the crowd all sighed. Well, we have our answer. Dean sighed. I tried, people. I tried. And then just a few minutes later, the surface of the lake began to shift, as Cassius raised a brow as the first contestant showed up, but rather than vigor and celebration that he had expected, what Cassius heard was panic. Total. Abject. Panic. Help. Help. He heard Crumb scream, in his thick Bulgarian accent, as Cassius sprang to his feet. What? He questioned, his heart racing. Hermione, water, sea. And those were the only words that he made out, before his body sprang into action as Cassius whipped out his wand and aimed it straight at the lake ahead, as he reached for his magic in pure desperation. Diviso. And then he tore apart the world, as he brought down his wand, and unlike the whole lake, split apart, as water gushed out onto the field around it, as he opened a path straight towards the hostages, and just as the water parted, he saw them there. The 4 of them were floating in the water, and while the 3 of them were petrified, the 4th one was not. Hermione. His heart dropped. She floated like a ghost, her curls drifting like seaweed. He didn't think, he just acted. 0000. Albus Dumbledore. In the blink of an eye, he cheers had turned to screams. Now, only silence lingered in the stone corridors of Hogwarts. How could this happen? Scrimgeour demanded, pacing outside the hospital wing, as they all waited for Poppy to inform them about the girl's condition, and Albus could not fathom how one of his own charms had failed. A girl drowning. The second task cancelled. Ludo Bagman added, as he looked up, his face pale as paper. This is a disaster. And it was indeed. It was indeed. This is the second time that the safety of the students has been compromised, the Bosbaton headmistress spoke softly from the side. Perhaps it is a good idea to be done with this whole thing, and that would be a major blow to their ministry's reputation, and would make him no friends there. There is no need for that, Madame Maxime, he tried to assuage her worries, but the woman was rightly worried. I did not think that you would ever make a mistake like that, and it had been he who had cast the spell of petrification, and Albus could cast it without a whisper, and yet somehow the spell had been warped. But perhaps the papers are right. You have gotten too old, she taunted, and the deputy headmistress chose to intervene in that moment. Preposterous, Minerva cut in, confronting Maxime. He is the best wizard in all of Britain, she defended him even as he tried to stop her. Yet his mistake nearly cost my student her life, and it wasn't a surprise that she was so angry, but in his mind, Miss Granger would always be one of his own students. She was once my student as well, and I am equally saddened by her suffering, Albus cut in, as he apologized to the foreign entourage. Don't grovel, Albus. We all know that you did not make a mistake, Minerva bristled sharply, her loyalty and belief in him absolute. Then how is it that 2 students nearly died right under his watch? The French half-giantess was not backing down, as Albus sighed. First, it was a 4th champion, then it was the chain breaking up, and now this. Corners have been cut. A part of me believes that we should simply end this all right here and now. And it was Scrimgeour who cut in again. Well, that is all nothing more than a simple threat, he warned the half-giantess. You will not simply abandon your champion, so it would be better to steer this conversation towards a more sensible and reasonable conclusion, he suggested, and it was Igor who became the voice of reason. He is right, and the Drumstrang headmaster joined in. We cannot just end the tournament right here and now, the man added, being relatively reasonable. So what do you suggest? Asked the disgruntled woman. That we remove Albus as the host and appoint a new, more neutral party to the position, and given that one of yours was just attacked, I believe that I am the most suited for this new role, and the room grew silent at those words. Albus did not make a mistake. You cannot blame him for your FAI. But he stopped Minerva. If that is the final decision of all the parties involved, then I shall happily step away, he said. As long as the students and participants are safe, I care little about useless titles and powers. We shall talk about it after we know more about Miss Granger's condition. And just as he spoke that, Poppy came out of the hospital wing, sighing as she gave him a nod. We are lucky that the boy acted when he did, and indeed, Cassius had taken but a second to act as he split apart the lake to free all of the hostages, including an unconscious and drowning Hermione Granger. If he had been but a few seconds later, we might have lost the girl, and relief filled him as the matron turned towards the French woman. She needs rest, but she will make a full recovery, and that was a relief for them all. Well, then I believe we must report this to the minister, Scrimgeour added, and walked away at once. I must see the girl, Madame Maxime added, and rushed into the room as Igor followed her, leaving him alone with Minerva. Every year, Minerva whispered. And every year, it's the children who pay the price. Late into the night, Cassius stood there by the bed of an unconscious Hermione as he held her hand, as he saw for himself the cost of his actions. This was his doing. He did not yet know how, or why. But he was certain about one thing. His presence was the reason that she had nearly died twice now. He had been able to save her, but his mere presence had put her in danger, and if he were to fail in stopping Voldemort, then there would be thousands more like her. She should have accepted my offer. A cold, chilling voice broke through the silence, as Cassius turned around and saw Harry standing there, yet his body stiffened, and in the blink of an eye, the wand was aimed at the young boy. For he knew that this was not Harry. So you do know. The green eyes bled into red, and the smile that followed didn't belong to Harry at all. His blood ran cold. That wasn't Harry. That thing wearing his face, it was something else entirely. That saves me quite some time, then. Chapter 58. Cassius Black. Expecto Patronum. Cassius shouted, as a unicorn made of light rushed out of his wand, but just before it could reach Harry, or whomever truly stood in front of him, he took out of his wand, and a flood of blackness rushed out of it. The flood of darkness clashed against the rampaging creature and halted it in its path. Their magics pushed against one another, and Cassius took solace in the fact that they were both nearly equal to one another, and as those red orbs glowed, the clash intensified before their respective spells dissipated in a massive wave of magic. I should have expected nothing less from the heir chosen by Arcturus, Harry whispered as Cassius refused to lower his wand. The stubborn fool gave me quite some trouble in his day, and now you as his heir continue his legacy, and that just confirmed one of his suspicions that a bigot he may be, but Arcturus Black was no fool. The man saw through all my ploys, and I failed to cajole him no matter what I tried, he continued, reminiscing about the past. Power, wealth, influence. I offered him everything, even a direct connection to my lineage, and that was through Bellatrix probably, but despite it all Arcturus had refused to bow. And now his heir continues to defy me as well, and Cassius remembered his words from earlier. You did this to her, he asked, his blood boiling in rage. Yes, the boy answered nonchalantly. There are consequences to denying the Dark Lord. She humiliated me. His voice thundered, as his lips rose up in joy. So, I punished her. It is luck that she managed to survive, for few can boast living after defying the Dark Lord, and so that was why he was here. To finish the job. I won't let you harm her. Not again, Cassius declared, his grip tightening over his wand, as the Dark Lord smirked. Oh, you need not worry about that. In the grand scheme of things, the mood blood is rather inconsequential. No, the person I am more interested in is you, and in contrast to his expectations, the boy put away his wand as Cassius frowned. Your magic. Your power. Your will. It all reminds me of myself, and Cassius felt nauseated by that mere comparison. I am nothing like you, and the Dark Lord chuckled at his words. But you could be, and he would much rather die than become a creature of pain and suffering. Join me, Black, he offered, and Cassius was a bit taken aback by his words. No thanks, I would much rather bring you down, and those eyes narrowed. So you are hell-bent on repeating the mistakes of your ancestor, and he saw the Dark Lord move his hand as he prepared himself for another attack, when suddenly a new voice intervened. Time's up. And he looked up and saw the matron standing there at the door, and in an instant, he saw Harry's demeanor shift as he glanced towards the kind matron. Nothing, and he used that bright and innocent smile of Potter as the matron frowned, her years of seeing through lies allowed her to see through another one. Then why do you have your wand out? She asked him, as Cassius glanced at the Dark Lord, his mind wanting him to scream out the truth about the boy standing in front of him, but he stopped. Nothing, I was just about to get the time, he answered, and the woman had nothing more to say as she nodded. Well, your time is up. So, you should both leave and let her rest. And with that, he pocketed the wand and made to leave the hospital wing, his eyes latched to Harry's body, for he feared that he might come again, and if he was not here to intervene. I won't let you harm her, Cassius declared as they stood outside the hospital wing, and the Dark Lord smirked. One does not defy the Dark Lord and suffer no consequences. It is time enough that the Moodblood girl learns her place, and as great and devoted as he may be, he could not protect Hermione all the time. I defied you, he whispered, smirking. And I am willing to do so 1,000 times again, Cassius taunted. Then you shall die as well. Why else do you think I put your name in the tournament? And he was not surprised by that declaration. I will reveal your secret to the world, Cassius threatened, and he chuckled. And who will they believe? The pure-blood scion of the disgraced Black family, whose very character is in question because he lied to get into the Triwizard tournament, and that was a bad move. There are others who can echo my word, and the Dark Lord laughed. And if they do, you shall force my hand and end the life of the boy inside me, and that stilled him, as Cassius looked into his eyes. You wouldn't dare, he called the bluff. You would end up killing yourself, Cassius warned, and he raised a brow. I survived death once. I can do so again. I have conquered death, Black, and now nothing will stand in my way, and Cassius would not let that happen. He could not let that happen. But I will honor your request. I will spare the girl for some time, he whispered as he walked past him, and gave the declaration. That is as long as you kill Albus Dumbledore in front of the entire world. And before he could say anything, the Dark Lord. And if you fail, it won't just be the Moodblood that dies, and a chill ran through his spine at those words. Your family, your friends, and everything you hold dear. I will ruin it all, while you watch helplessly, and Cassius's magic roared in rage, and for the first time in his life, he experienced the use of accidental magic, as it clashed with the Dark Lord's magic in that very corridor as he slowly walked away. The choice is yours. 0000. Albus Dumbledore. In the end, it was officially decided that he would not be the overseer of the tournament anymore, and with a split vote, Igor was appointed as the next overseer, and the first matter that came into discussion was the fate of the second task. What are we to do about the second task, then? Questioned Ludo, and it was Igor who proposed. We must replace it, and he had to intervene. I am afraid we lack the funds for such an undertaking. Already, we have spent quite a substantial amount of gold on all of the tournaments. I believe we do not have the budget to reconduct a task, and it was Maxime who joined in. I concur, she added angrily. I just want to be done with all of this as soon as possible, and take my students back home, and with that, Igor nodded. With all the captives rescued, one could argue that the second task was finished, Screamgore added, and the ministry could not afford another massive disaster. There were rumors that Amelia Bones just wanted to be done with all this as quickly as possible. Then let us talk about the third task, Igor began, and everyone perked up at that. I propose a change, and they were listening with rapt attention. With everything that has transpired, the initial plans seem too risky now. So, I believe the task should be simplified, and that would be for the best, but Dumbledore had a suspicion that his objective was something else entirely. That the man in front of him was dancing to the tunes of a hidden master, one whose sinister plans now involved him. What do you propose? And the headmaster smiled. A duel, and Maxime was the first to object. The tournament is not a simple test of magical might and dueling. And who would the contestants even duel against? And that was the problem. Us, Igor added, and Albus realized his ploy. Us? He asked, and the man nodded. Yes, us, and as headmasters and judges we shall evaluate their magics, and let the world know the true height of magic, and it was an inspired idea, one that would make it certain that no student would be harmed. It is much safer than a maze riddled with creatures and traps. We do not want a repeat of the second and first task, do we? Igor added, as he saw the hesitation on the French headmistress's face. But we have 3 headmasters and 4 contestants, and how will we even choose who will face who? Ludo questioned, and it was a valid point nonetheless. We will need to include a 3rd wizard. I propose, Rufus Screamgore, and the man was a well-regarded figure. After all, he is one of the judges and has vowed to be impartial during the tournament, and no one here can question his skills, and the man in question nodded. And what of how the matches will be decided? A simple draw, just as the students chose the dragons, and Albus spoke again, hinting at the hidden purpose of this change. And what if a student from one school were to draw their own headmaster? He questioned, and Igor shrugged. That is their luck then, but I believe all of us here can be rather impartial in our duties, and Ludo was quick to nod. Yes, of course. We are judges in the end, and there was no such thing as impartiality. It is much safer than a maze filled with death traps, added Maxime, nearly convinced, and Ludo and Screamgore nodded as well. I support it as well, and Albus had a suggestion of his own. Well, you see, dueling is rather a rare sport in this part of the world. So, perhaps to familiarize the audience with it, we can hold a little exhibition at first, one in which participants can be drawn at random, and Ludo Bagman. A very good idea, it will also help boost the inter-school rivalries, and Igor frowned. I see no merit in it, and he shrugged. But do you see any harm in it? He countered, and Igor was stupefied at his suggestion as all eyes turned towards Maxime. Well, it would be a good show for the students to gauge their own capabilities, and so it was decided. Then it is decided. Back in his office, Albus sat in front of the boy who had just warned him about Igor's ploys. You were right about Igor, he whispered, and the boy raised a brow. It is a trap, Cassius Black whispered, and Albus knew it as well. It is why you must defeat him first. Chapter 59. Cassius Malfoy. You think I can defeat him? Cassius asked the headmaster, who had spoken those words with a greater confidence than even himself. Yes, and he was a bit surprised by the headmaster's confidence in his ability, but a part of him wondered if this belief was not driven out of confidence, but rather desperation as well. From what I could understand, Tom's magical prowess is constrained by Harry's abilities, and indeed, for all intents and purposes, a wizard like Voldemort should have easily overpowered him. Cassius was stronger even than an above-average adult wizard like Sirius. But Voldemort, he would easily admit that the Dark Lord was way above his level, and it was why he had been hesitant to attack Harry at first. But in their little clash, he had realized that the difference between them was not so great that he could not overcome it. How? He questioned, and the headmaster rubbed his chin, as Cassius's eyes narrowed at his hand, and the magic surrounding it. Apart from being a rather knowledgeable advisor of sorts, Pernell was a damn good witch as well and helped him train regularly. It was because of that training that he was able to sense a sliver of magic residue from the headmaster's hand. Though we wizards treat the soul and the body as separate entities, the truth is that both of these aspects of nature share a bond deeper than any magic, and that seemed genuine enough. Right now, Voldemort's soul is like a parasite controlling Harry, and though it may have been able to suppress the young Harry for now, that does not mean that Voldemort has severed the connection between Harry's body and soul, and so that meant no body can inhabit 2 souls, and the headmaster agreed with his assessment. Indeed, and it is why I believe that the sooner we engage Tom, the better, for the more we wait, the deeper Tom's connection to Harry's body grows, and with that his powers shall grow as well, and that was why he had to engage him as soon as possible. Then why won't you do it? He whispered, because he was definitely more powerful, and the headmaster was silent for a time as those blue eyes lit up. I believe you already have the answer for that, and Cassius leaned back as he brought up his hand, and made a small sweep to the left, as he dissipated the magic surrounding the headmaster's hand, and in the blink of an eye the skin on it turned black, as the man's great secret was revealed. I believe I had but half a reason. He challenged with a hint of anger, as the aged man smiled solemnly. She told me that you would know, and of course she did. And he wanted to curse and scream and rage, but all he felt in that moment was disappointment. He had warned him the headmaster about the curse on the ring, yet in the end the man had repeated that very mistake which had killed him in his dreams. Why? He asked, and the most powerful wizard in the world leaned back in his chair. I could blame the fates, but the truth is far simpler, my boy, and the man had a rather brittle and forlorn expression. I am just a tired old man filled with too many regrets, and they all were filled with regrets of some sort. The world sees me as a wizard of great power, yet in their desperation for a hero, they overlook my mistakes, and do not see how I am haunted by them to this day, and who wouldn't be, given that his choices had led to the death of thousands. But this is not like those times, Cassius argued. You knew about the curse. You know about Harry and Voldemort, and so there was little moral conflict for him to wade through. The choice was simple. I am too old to make these choices now, my boy. Even without the curse eating away at me, I would be dead in a few years, and the world around us would become rudderless, and that was what Pernell had meant. You want me to be the next you? Cassius guessed, and much to his surprise, the headmaster smiled as he shook his head. No, I want you to be better. I want you to be more ready than I was, and he sighed and he saw him turn to the side, and look towards an old picture, one of a young and ambitious Dumbledore smiling and laughing as he stood beside a few friends, his arm swung tightly around the neck of a boy similar to his age, the mismatched color of his eyes visible even through the black and white picture. That wasn't there earlier, Cassius guessed, for he would surely have noticed it if it had been present. Yes, it wasn't, he agreed as those blue eyes dimmed. It is one of the only pictures I have of us, and for decades now, I hid it from the world in fear of the shame and damage it could bring, and he saw the man reach for the picture as he touched it softly. But now with death staring me in the face, I have learned not to care about all this, and with that, he faced him once more. When I was your age, I was a boy tainted with rage, ambition, and prejudice. That ambition poisoned people around me, and though later on I was able to free myself from its curse, those around me suffered from the consequences of my dreams, and he spoke of Grindelwald, and many others that he had inspired. You are not responsible for Grindelwald's actions, Cassius assured him once more, but the man shook his head. But I am Cassius. I am responsible for Gellert, for Tom, and the thousands who followed them both, and the thousands who died at their hands. I am responsible for it all, and I do not wish to carry the burden of thousands more, and with that, the man took a deep breath, as he put his wand on the table. I can't, he whispered before he looked into his eyes. I only ever wanted to teach, yet history has forced me into becoming a warrior and a leader, and then he smiled strongly as his voice grew stronger. You, on the other hand, are a born leader and warrior. You have the heart and the determination that I never did, so I wish to help you in helping me, and his intention was clear as Cassius eyed the wand which Gellert himself had once wielded. The most powerful wand in the world, forged by death itself, the Elder Wand. And it was being offered to him, along with an opportunity to learn from the greatest and most powerful wizard of their time. And Cassius realized that he had been wrong about the headmaster. He was not the evil Dark Lord many theorized him to be, nor was he a saint who could do no wrong. He was a tired old man who only wanted to die in peace, doing what he loved. I believe your evenings are now free once more, he added as Cassius thought over everything that he had heard. Would you be kind enough to let me experience the joy of teaching once more, Cassius? And in the end, the decision was simple to make as he looked him in the eye and nodded. So be it. 0000. Daphne Greengrass. The whole school was in shock about what had happened to Hermione. She may not be a student at their school anymore, but seeing a fellow student nearly die before their eyes had a sobering effect, as people realized that the Triwizard Tournament was not as jovial and simple as they had thought. The girl herself had woken up a few days ago and had little to offer about the name of the culprit, though she had an inkling that, unlike the brown-haired girl, Cassius knew about the one responsible and was planning retribution. What do you mean you won't be attending any more classes? Questioned Tracy as Cassius answered with a forced shrug. As a participant in the tournament, I am exempt from the exams this year, and after making a request to the teachers, they have allowed me a little respite to prepare for the final task, and this was no little respite. There were still over 2 months in the final stage of the tournament, and there was little doubt in her mind that he was planning to do something about the man who had tried to kill Hermione in that time. But you weren't going to participate in the tournament, Tracy countered as they sat in the gardens. Well, I am not, but I would have to be a fool to give up on skipping school, he lied, and Daphne saw through it at once, and if Tracy did the same, she did not call him out on it. Damn. Perhaps I should have put my name in the tournament as well, and that was a jest made in error, and Tracy recognized it quickly as her face morphed as she apologized to Cassius, who nearly lost his life to the entire thing. I am sorry, and Cassius simply shook his head. It's fine, he said before he turned towards her. The potion is complete. You can collect it from Professor Snape, he said as her heart stilled, for she had known that such a day was coming, but in the end, her mind refused to believe it. So that means... Tracy gasped with joy. Astoria will be cured of her curse, and after a second of silence, her friend jumped up in joy. Finally. She will be cured. And Tracy was jumping with joy, while Daphne remained silent as she felt a burden lift off of her shoulder. I will have Professor Snape contact St. Mungo. But before he could say anything more... No. She stopped him, as both Tracy and Cassius turned silent at her words. You can contact them yourself. But she continued to shake her head. I can't just simply take such a thing from you, Cassius, and she could not even fathom the cost of such a thing, and both of them were stunned by her words, but Daphne had given it much thought. Daphne, as long as Astoria is cured, gold is irrelevant. But she had made her mind. No. She declared with finality. Then what do you suggest? Cassius asked, and she needed a few days to get everything sorted out on her end. Just give me a few days, I will get it to you, she said, and he nodded with a sigh. As you wish. So Dumbledore intends for the boy to challenge me in open, the Dark Lord laughed, as Karkaroff felt a chill run down his spine, and though his form was but that of a boy, the Dark Lord remained ever perceptive and demanding. My lord, I tried but Dumbledore wheeled. Silence. He whispered, but it was enough to force his lips shut as the Dark Lord's feet rose into the air. Well, it is good then. The world has begun to put the Black Heir on a pedestal, and after he had defeated the dragon and then saved the Drumstrang champions hostage, the papers had changed their tone about the boy rather quickly, hailing him as a prodigy of sorts. And darkness oozed from his body as black mist surrounded the area, as Igor felt his mark burn. Defeating him will be a good enough opportunity to show the world the new chosen one. And so, the fate of the wizarding world would be decided by the duel of one chosen by fate, and one who had chosen himself. Chapter 60. Cassius Malfoy. So, with his decision made, Cassius withdrew from his classes, as Albus Dumbledore agreed to train him so that he could bridge the gap between him and the amalgamation of Tom and Harry, which threatened to destroy this world. Still, dueling was no easy task, and given that he was a student and Albus Dumbledore the headmaster, they needed a place to train. Thankfully, he knew just the place. I always knew that the room was here, the headmaster commented as they stood against an empty wall. Though I never managed to sense it, and that he knew, as Cassius sought a place to duel and paced 3 times in front of the empty wall. And with that, a door appeared, as the headmaster raised a brow. What did you do? He asked, genuinely curious, and Cassius shrugged. I just thought about needing a place to practice dueling. The headmaster looked intrigued. It was familiar to the one he used for himself, having quite a few training dummies, and a few books placed in a rack along the wall. So, this is the famous come-and-go room. The headmaster whispered, and his surprise was genuine, which confirmed that, unlike himself, Tom and many others, Albus Dumbledore had never found the place. Did you really not know how to access it? He asked, and the man shook his head. No, I did not, and he had his wand out as he cast some basic spells. There is a mention of it in Helga's diaries, but the secret to it has eluded me for decades, and Cassius was truly intrigued by these diaries, for the headmaster had mentioned them before. The diaries of the founders and the previous headmasters, can I read them? He asked, and the old wizard's lips thinned as he shook his head. I am afraid not quite yet, he denied him, though not without a good reason. Only a headmaster is allowed to read them, and the founders made it certain that no one apart from the headmaster is allowed to read these diaries and records. Few even leave anything, and fewer still venture into the tales of the past, though I have always been much intrigued by it, and who wouldn't be? Still, don't worry. One day, you will be able to read them all, including my own little addition to the collection, and those words caught him by surprise, for Cassius had not really given much thought to his future. He enjoyed dueling and tinkering with runes and artifacts, but that was mostly it. He had enough money and political clout that he did not need to work at all if he so desired. You think I will be headmaster one day? He questioned, and the old wizard smiled sagely. I don't think that, my boy. I know that, and he did not share the old man's belief, still they had wasted enough time on small talk. Still, the magic of the founders continues to surprise me to this day, and he was not much different. The entirety of Hogwarts was a magical marvel that had no equal. It was the first school of its kind and, in many ways, the foundation of the magical world. Still, I believe we have wasted enough time, and so the two of them stood at opposite corners of the arena, and drew their wands. A simple duel to gauge where you stand, he offered, and Cassius nodded as he prepared himself to go all out, with little to no restraint. I won't be holding back, and the headmaster smiled at his words. Neither will I, and with that, Cassius was the first to move, as he twisted the wand in his hand, and sent a purple orb racing towards the headmaster. The whole lesson lasted a few hours, and the two of them dueled for over half a dozen times, and only in the last duel did Cassius manage to last more than a few minutes against the headmaster. He is a damn monster, Cassius complained to the old woman who had become a constant companion to him in his solitude. Albus is the strongest wizard of his generation, Pernell whispered proudly. There is a reason that both Gellert and Voldemort feared only him, despite their prowess, and now he knew the reason as well, for though he knew that there was a massive gap between them, he had failed to fathom the sheer depth of it. Still, I would say that you were quite impressive as well, and he scoffed, as he looked up at her. Don't patronize me, and she shook her head. I am not. You truly were quite impressive, and he really doubted that. Believe it or not, Albus was not holding back against you after the third duel, and the first 2 duels had ended in but 2 minutes, but Cassius had begun to fight back a bit after that as he got accustomed to the man's blinding speed and mastery over magic itself. Still, I don't just want to defeat Voldemort, he whispered, for the headmaster was giving him an opportunity, one where he was offering him the proverbial hat. You want to defeat Albus in the 3rd round? Pernell guessed his intentions, and he nodded. Yes, and he had his own reasons for doing that. This world, the one that he was born into, had changed much because of it, and for many nights now he wondered if the change that had come with him was all good, and the sad thing was that he could not answer that question with a resolute yes. Voldemort was alive once more and had taken over the body of an innocent Harry Potter. The Dark Lord's followers had nearly killed his friends, and Hermione had nearly died twice, and all of it was because of him. And so a part of him felt responsible for ending the evil which he had allowed to flourish, and much more. Unlike the rest of his peers, Cassius was cursed with the knowledge of the times to come, and knew very well of the dangers that lay ahead not just for his friends but for the entire wizarding world. Pernell had told him how he carried the weight of the magical world on his shoulders, and with his knowledge, he was beginning to understand just what exactly she meant by that. He knew that the age of the internet was about to begin, and soon enough, it would become impossible to hide the magical world as it is. He could parrot his concerns to everyone, but no one would pay him any heed, but if he were to be the heir to the proverbial throne of Albus Dumbledore, then that would give his voice much weight. But now I don't think that I can do it, Pernell floated in the air. You can, she whispered, making him look up. How? And she pointed at the stone sitting on the table. By using that, and he frowned. Albus is powerful indeed. But there have been wizards far more powerful than him, all of whom are but a simple thought away from you, and he did plan on summoning Salazar Slytherin to learn more about the patroness, then he could do the same thing for the headmaster. But whom do I call? He questioned, and Pernell. Well, you leave that to me. Your dueling style is quite similar to a few wizards from the past, and she was rubbing her chin. There are a dozen wizards and witches who can teach you a lot, but the man you need most is none other than Salazar Slytherin. 0000. Hermione Granger. As Cassius trained in secret, someone he'd sworn to protect stirred from slumber. It took her 2 days to wake up from her potion-induced slumber, and even after that, the matron remained rather strict with her and confined her to the hospital wing for monitoring as Hermione slowly recovered from her brush with death. And the mere experience of being unable to move as water crept up inside your lungs was truly haunting, and she had thought her lost, forfeit until just before she had lost her consciousness, the water around her had vanished. She did not need to see who it was, for she knew that there was only one wizard on that stage who would do something like that, yet she had not seen him once, even once, after waking up. Where is he? She asked Daphne and Tracy as they came for their regular visit just before breakfast, and the two girls looked at each other before giving a short answer. He is busy, Tracy answered, but she could sense that there was something more to it. Busy with what? She asked, and she wanted to see him. Wanted to thank him, but he was not here, and she had an idea why. He blames himself for this, doesn't he? She questioned as her fists balled up, and Hermione had read his letters from when she had been attacked at the World Cup, and had realized just how big of a mistake she had made. You know what he is like. But he will be fine. He is going to finish this, Daphne cut in as Hermione's head snapped towards the blonde girl. What? She asked. He is going to get revenge for you, for all of us, and with that, the blonde put a copy of the Prophet on the bed. And with that the girls left, leaving behind only a copy of the Prophet to keep her company, and as she opened the paper, plastered on the first page was a massive picture from a few months ago when the Ministry had presented both Cassius and Harry with their Order of Merlin badges, and below the moving picture was a headline that explained everything. The Chosen One vs the Unchosen One. By Rita Skeeter. In a bid to salvage the reputation of the disastrous tournament, the committee has arranged an exhibition duel a day before the final task. The purpose of the event is to reignite the passion for dueling amongst the new generation of witches and wizards, and who better to spread this message than two of the most prized wizards of the new generation. Harry Potter, the boy who lived twice, the Chosen One, whose magical prowess has shown himself to be a bit of a late bloomer, and has finally begun to live up to his promise, will be facing off against the unchosen champion Cassius Black. The young Black heir's protest against his alleged forced participation in the tournament is known to all, and he may not have beaten the Killing Curse twice, but his feats are no less impressive. The boy brought down the fiend, Fenrir Greyback, and recently subdued a Hungarian Horntail all by himself. And though this is but one of the many bouts that have been prepared, but there is little doubt in my mind that it is the crown jewel of the itinerary and will set hearts ablaze all over the wizarding world. In the room of requirement, a young Cassius stood once more, the resurrection stone in hand, as he took a deep breath and rolled it in his hand as he had done so a dozen times before, as he closed his eyes and whispered the name of the wizard whose legacy shook the entire world to this day. Salazar Slytherin. 0000. Read ahead and support me through my Patreon. www.patreon.com/drkest. Chapter 61. Cassius Black. Cassius stared at the silvery form of the Slytherin founder and could not help but be mesmerized. Even through the silver, he could see the color of his eyes, and it was a familiar deep green, as the bearded man eyed him down. He was an old man with a long white beard and a staff in his hand, but even in death, the proud Salazar's back refused to bend, as the man stood tall. That pendant, he whispered, as Cassius was pushed out of his stupor, and looked down at the Slytherin's locket hanging around his neck. What is your name? He asked, and even though he was but a spectre, his voice carried too much power. The very magic in the air shifted at the sound, the walls and magic of Hogwarts bending around to his will, even in the form of a spectre. Cassius Black, he answered, and those eyes dimmed. Your mother, what was her name? He continued to ask for some reason, and it was as if the magic around him compelled him to obey his commands. Narcissa Black, and then a frown appeared on his face. You are not one of mine, and there was disappointment in his tone. What do you mean? Cassius asked, trying to make sense of his words. Nothing, he answered powerfully, as those eyes moved down to the house emblem glowing on his uniform. Rowena, and a whisper of a smile appeared on his face. So, you are a student at our school, he asked, with a hint of excitement, and Cassius nodded. Yes, and you are Salazar Slytherin, one of the 4 founders. He confirmed, and the ancient wizard nodded. Yes, and to think that I would be summoned back in these halls like this, the man smiled as he gazed at the walls around him with a mystified longing, and Cassius did not miss how, with every passing second, his form grew darker and darker, as if gaining substance. The resurrection stone, he whispered, floating around him, as he eyed the dark stone in his hand. You found one of the Peveril's treasures, and Cassius nodded. I did, and I need your help, Cassius began, and the man nodded. I guessed as much, but do tell me what has become of my school, he asked with interest. It still stands tall. It now has around 300 students, and those eyes widened. 300, and what year is it exactly? And he sounded impressed. It's 1995, Cassius answered, and the man's eyes widened. So much time has passed, and what more could he say, as the man sighed and finally mentioned the reason of his summoning. You say you need my help? He asked again, and Cassius nodded. Yes, I was told by someone that you were the one who created the patroness charm. And the wizard nodded, his lips turning up at the mention of the charm. Yes, it was one of Dahlia's most favorite spells, and he found the name unfamiliar. Dahlia. My wife, he answered, and Cassius remembered the tomb from the Chamber of Secrets, and the name that had been long forgotten. I created it just for her, he continued, reminiscing about the past. Well, I need you to teach me all about that because I must use it to defeat a Dark Lord, and the man's eyes narrowed. A Dark Lord? But that spell can do no harm, it is lethal only to those wretched demons from hell, and the Lethofolds, and Cassius knew that as well. Yes, I know that, but the Dark Lord I speak of has no physical form. He has become a sort of Horcrux and has implanted himself into the body of a young wizard, and only the patroness is able to push him out of his body, and those eyes narrowed at the mention of Horcruxes. Horcruxes. His face turned ashen at the mention of that abomination as he turned away from him. That magic still exists today? He asked, and Cassius shook his head. Not widely, this Dark Lord is the first wizard to use it in more than 10 centuries, and he closed his eyes. To think that my master's spell would linger on for so long, and the whisper stilled him, as Cassius couldn't believe his ears. Master? He asked, as the old wizard nodded as he gazed at the window to the side. Yes, my master indeed. He was the greatest wizard I have ever laid eyes on, yet the darkness took him down a path that forced the 4 of us to destroy him, and he could feel how the man still lamented that his decision. But it was Herpo who created the first Horcrux, Cassius whispered, and Salazar's lips thinned, as the man looked down in embarrassment. And that was the name of my master, Herpo, and that stupefied him, as Cassius could not believe his ears. Herpo was your master, and the old wizard nodded. Yes, he was, but then he became my greatest failure, and with that, the man took a deep sigh. I have spoken more than I should have, the man declared as his lingering figure landed on the ground. So, you wish to learn more about the patroness charm? And Cassius nodded. That, and I wish for you to train me as well, so that I may defeat him, and save an innocent soul, and the wizard's eyes gleamed at his words. If you had summoned me at any place other than these halls, then I would have been unable to help you, he whispered, and suddenly he saw the man raise his hand, as magic began to gather around him. And while mostly magic remained invisible, such was the scale and power of his magic that it took a proper form as the man's body began to gain mass, and the shadows turned into flesh, as Salazar Slytherin appeared in front of him in full. It has been quite some years since I have taught someone. 0000. Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore took a step back, as the magic from the young boy in front of him forced him to move for the first time since they had begun this training of theirs. And his sole skidded off the ground, as their magic clashed against one another, sending ripples through the room, as Cassius tried to win a fight against him. Impressive, he whispered, for he had not expected him to improve so much just within 10 days, and so he twisted his wand, as the arching lightning bolt shifted slightly, and raced towards the wizard in question, whose eyes widened for though the boy was beginning to match him in his speed and power, the finesse of using magic for combat was a skill that needed years to master. Sylvan. And the air in the room shifted, for the boy hissed as his magic collided with the boy, yet his body suddenly dissolved into a puddle of snakes, much to his surprise. Tempest. And the voice now came from behind as he was forced to defend himself at the last moment, with the shield, yet not before the boy vanished once more, appearing at his back as he twisted his wand once more. Sectum Sempra. And this was Severus's spell, and negated most magical shields, so it forced Albus to rely on a trick that he had not used in ages, as he vanished with a pop and apparat behind the boy. Crack. Shit. But he was too far into his spell chain, as Albus cast a disarming charm and his wand flew into the air, though much to his surprise, the boy did not give up and flung his hand. Oxio. And the wand whipped into his hand once more, but by then Albus had plenty of time to freeze him in his place, rendering his little trick useless. Clack. And the wooden wand hit the ground, as Albus unfroze the boy, marking another victory, though for 10 days, the boy had come farther than he had expected. Damn it. The young Black Lord cursed, as he stumbled slightly as Albus encouraged. I did not think you knew any parcel magic, he whispered as the boy summoned his wand back into his hands. Well, you are not the only one with tricks up your sleeve, and he had an idea just how he had gotten his hands on such archaic and ancient magic, but he did not probe further. Still, you have come along rather nicely, he praised, for the boy deserved it. But I still couldn't defeat you, and Albus smiled, for that was a lofty goal. You have not, he acknowledged his frustrations, though not before showing him the bright side as well. But I can assure you, that you are now amongst the 5 people who have come the closest in doing so, and so that meant that the boy was now one of the 5 most skilled duelists in the wizarding world, and if not for his vast knowledge and experience, Albus would have at least lost one bout of the 83 that they had fought. Still, I do wonder what it is like to learn from one of the founders themselves, and the boy's head snapped towards him as Albus spoke of his secret so nonchalantly. You knew. And he hadn't before. Now I do, and the black-haired boy rolled his eyes as they sat down on the chair, as Albus offered him critique. You are quite skilled as a duelist, but you have a penchant for ignoring your defense. You rely too much on speed and tricks to protect you, and that could be costly, for Voldemort would exploit that weakness. And you hesitate to use transfiguration and animation magic against me, even though he knew for a fact that he was quite skilled at that. Are you really asking me that? He scoffed. Because I cannot match you in transfiguration and animation magic, and he couldn't, of course. Perhaps, but still, while you are training against me, you must realize that your opponent is Tom, and I can quite confidently say that he is no match for me when it comes to these techniques, and so just as his secret mentor had taught him his tricks, Albus planned on passing on his own techniques and tricks to the boy. Why don't I give you a few ideas? And so the lesson began and lasted for hours, and by the time they were done, Albus returned to his office to rest, supporting quite a few scuffs and scratches from their last duel. And as he was resting, he heard the gargoyle of his office move, as a figure emerged from the staircase. I was beginning to wonder when you would come to greet me, the headmaster began, as he watched a young little boy walk into his office, yet this was not the Harry of old. No, this was not Harry at all. Tom, and those red orbs narrowed, as he did not even deign to deny the accusation as he smiled and greeted back. It has been quite a long time, Professor. 0000. And after his lessons with the headmaster, Cassius did not rest as he summoned the founder once more and began to learn from him as much as he could, though just as he was resting, he remembered one thing that had been bothering him for some time. That day when I first summoned you, you asked me about my mother's name. And he nodded. I did, the old wizard agreed. Why? It doesn't matter, he whispered back. Is it because you wanted to see if I was a descendant of yours? And if the stillness of the man was anything to go by, Cassius's hunch had been correct. And how did you guess that? The name of your wife was Dahlia, and your daughter was named after a flower as well, wasn't she? He whispered, as the man nodded. Yes, she was. It was a promise we made, a reminder of our love, and with that, the wizard stuck his staff on the ground, and in the blink of an eye, the solid ground transformed into a field of flowers, as Cassius's eyes widened. Dahlia loved flowers, so I created this spell for her, one that creates a field of flowers of all kinds. We decided that we would name all our daughters using a flower's name, kind of like a family name, so that years and years later, a symbol of our love would remain, and so he had an inkling. It is a shame that I will never know if they kept the tradition or not, and as he remembered one Lily Potter, he wondered the same. I think they did. Chapter 62. Albus Dumbledore. Albus stared at his old student and felt nothing but disappointment. In the boy. But more so in himself, for what stood in front of him a soul infesting, a young and innocent body like a parasite. Something that was an affront to everything natural and holy about magic, and all of it was because of his faults. You have become old, Professor, Tom whispered as he settled down into the seat opposite him, as he had years ago when he had come here seeking the job of the Dada Professor. I have, he answered, for he had become old. And you have become pitiful, he whispered, for that was what he felt for Tom. Pity. For he did not remember him as the fearsome and dangerous Dark Lord, but as the young boy he had found in that little orphanage, one who had been seeking a place to live in, a place to belong to. Pitiful, he scoffed, raging at his words. You call me pitiful, while I sit here alive, having conquered death itself, and that was his mistake, for death was not an enemy. It was a friend, and no matter how much one may try, it was impossible to escape this inevitability. I see no triumph, he whispered, sighing at him, hoping that he would see reason, but he wouldn't. I see only a parasite, clinging to life as an abomination, and Tom's anger was palpable, and his magic began to react to his emotions as clouds of darkness began to come off of him. Where you see an abomination, I see victory. I see triumph. No, he did not, for he could sense the weakness and doubt in his word. Then why do you sit here? Why have you come here? He asked, as Tom smirked. I just wanted to see you before I went into battle against your new champion, and he laughed as Albus sat there, watching in pity as his instincts screamed at him to reach for his wand. Truly, you haven't changed at all, still relying on your henchmen to do your dirty work while you sit there and reap all the fame and the benefits, and he laughed, as guilt gripped his heart, for though partly, Tom's words had a speck of truth in them. Before it was the Potters, and that little group of his, and now you have fallen so low as to rely on a literal child, and Tom laughed, as Albus sighed. If so, then I am no different than you, Albus taunted, and the laughter stopped. After all, you rely on henchmen to do your dirty work as well, don't you? It had taken him quite a few days to figure it out, but Albus finally knew of the man who had been sabotaging the Triwizard Tournament. Still, to think that you would be able to get the proud Igor Karkaroff to bend to your will once more, and if Tom was affected by the news, he did not show it. He is being taken away as we speak, he continued, for while he may have left the fate of Harry and Tom in the hands of another, but as headmaster, it fell to him to care for his students. You see, they discovered quite a few irregularities in his financial handling of the Drumstrangs accounts, and Tom scoffed, seemingly unbothered by his acolyte's fate. I couldn't care less about that traitor, and that was the tragedy of Tom, for he cared neither for his enemies nor for his friends. He has served his purpose, and soon enough, all of my faithful servants will be back with me, and Albus shook his head. No, such a day will never come, and Tom laughed. Why? Do you really think that boy could defeat me? And he did believe that. He believed that with all his heart, as those red eyes narrowed. Or do you plan on stepping into the ring yourself? He challenged, and he would not need to. The great Albus Dumbledore versus the Chosen One, he whispered, and though he had no plans of doing that, he would never tell that to him. If I feel like I have to, I just might, and those eyes narrowed, as silence lingered in the air. I don't think it will be wise of you to change the terms of our bout, Professor, and with that, the room shifted in an instant, as wands were drawn and aimed in the blink of an eye, as the entire room began to shake. I may have grown old, Albus admitted, as he aimed his wand at Tom. But I can assure you, I have not grown any weaker, and Tom knew that in his current state, he was no match for him, especially in these halls. You may be able to defeat me, and he moved his wand, and aimed it squarely at his temple, as Albus's teeth. But if you dare enter the field against me that day, then I am afraid you will be responsible for not one but 2 deaths, and this was one of the reasons why he had avoided a direct confrontation with Tom to this day. There was one thing that Tom feared more than anything else, death, and yet now he threatened him with that very thing. You won't kill yourself, Albus called out his bluff, and he was almost certain of that fact. But only almost. And Tom knew that. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, he answered back, as Dumbledore lowered his wand slowly, for if it was only Tom facing him, he may be able to find it in his heart to cast a spell. But it was not just Tom. It was Harry as well, and while Tom deserved to die, Harry was innocent, and Albus Dumbledore did not have the heart to take the life of an innocent young boy. But would you really like to test me on that, Professor? 0000. Tracy Davis. He will never accept this, Tracy told her friend, as she stared at the abhorrent betrothal agreement that Daphne had gotten drawn up in guilt and remorse. Calling it a betrothal agreement was a stretch. No, it was more like a slavery contract, and though in the pure blood world such things were still somewhat common, things were beginning to change, and Cassius was the herald of that change. The Black family held a lot of sway and influence over the pure blood society, and for that family to have a lord such as Cassius, who openly resisted the pure blood dogma, empowered others to do the same. So, his accepting this was nearly impossible. Then what am I supposed to offer him? Daphne whispered in worry and desperation, and she pitied her friend for how the times had sown such doubt in her heart. But Daphne was not used to having others do her favors, and Cassius was doing her the greatest favor she could imagine by saving her sister's life. Not this, Tracy said, as she put the folder to the side, as they sat in the dorms, with only a day left in the final bout. The cure for Astoria, even with a most conservative estimate, it would cost almost the entire fortune of my family, yet I cannot offer him that. At least not all of it, and the agreement contained quite a pretty penny, which she estimated to be half of Greengrass's fortune, and that made her wonder just what she had done to get her father to agree to such a thing. I cannot accept such a massive gift for nothing, and while she was right, but Cassius had little need of money. He was Lord Black and had enough gold and treasures in his vaults to last lifetimes. You and I both know that Cassius has no need of money, or servitude for that matter. He has more money than both of our houses combined, and if he ever wanted more, it would not take him long to earn it, and so Daphne grabbed her head in turmoil, as she found herself at a loss. Then what do you give to someone who has everything? But he did not have everything. Family, she whispered as Daphne looked up at her. Loyalty, trust, she numbered the few things that he never had. The agreement. And Tracy's temper rose at those words. Bollocks to that garbage. She thundered, stopping her from making the biggest mistake of her life. Cassius has no need of such a thing. No, he trusts you already. Trusts you more than you trust yourself, so do not give him that agreement, do not offer him terms and provisions, but give him your word, and that was what had attracted him to Hermione, but in the end, the brown-haired girl had betrayed him. One could blame the circumstances, could blame Cassius's father or Hermione's family, but that did not change the fact that she had betrayed him, and Cassius was pained much by it. Give him your word that you will stand by him come heaven or hell. Tell him that you wish to spend your entire life with him, that you shall be his as he shall be yours, for he was alone now. Draco and his mother both refused to talk to him, as Draco blamed him for their father's incarceration, and though Tracy knew that Narcissa Black did indeed love her son, the woman had to choose between a young and erratic Draco and a stable and steadfast Cassius. In the end, she had to choose between the 2 sons. And she had chosen Draco, not because she loved him more, but because he needed her more. Cassius understood that. He did, and had even mentioned how she had made the right choice, but even that smile had been unable to hide the pain in his words. I won't betray him, Tracy. Never, Daphne spoke strongly, and she did not doubt that. For if there was anyone else who could match Cassius in his stubbornness and loyalty, it was her. I know, but Cassius does not, and he had been betrayed by the people around him not once or twice but half a dozen times now. His father and brother loathe him, while his own mother first chose his father, then his twin over him, she reminded Daphne, whose lips thinned at the mention of Cassius's family. He may not mention it, but that would scar anyone, yet he persisted on, with not a single tear shed. He may not speak it, but he needs someone. He wants someone he can trust, he can rely on, he can share his worries with, someone he can share his happiness with, and while they were friends, what he sought was someone who went beyond that. He wants a partner for life, and she held her face as she offered her the most sage advice she could. Offer him that, she said, and Daphne nodded, as a tear slipped down her face. Thank you, Daphne whispered, as Tracy shrugged. Don't mention it, but after a second of thought. On second thought, you can mention it to Cassius a few years later when both of you are getting married, she whispered as Daphne narrowed. Tell him how I single-handedly saved your marriage, and that all I seek in compensation for that is a wardrobe designed by Versace, and she made a face as Daphne rolled her eyes. You and your obsession with clothes, and Tracy gasped. Says the girl cannot help but stare at that dress all night, she whispered, pointing towards the black dress hanging in the wardrobe, as Daphne's eyes shifted. I do not stare at it for its designer, but she should. I know. You stare at it for the person who gave it to you. And as the 2 girls closed their eyes, Magic clashed against magic in another corner of the school as it never had in the halls of Hogwarts as Albus Dumbledore fought against Cassius for one last time before his final bout, and the aged wizard's wand moved like a blur as he was pushed to the limits by the young wizard in front of him who used magics and tricks that even he had never witnessed. The clash lasted for an hour, leaving them both exhausted until their wands flew into the air at the same time, as the duel ended in a draw. And the blue-eyed headmaster raised a brow, as the woods clacked on the ground. "So, are you ready?" he asked, and the young wizard was on the ground, breathing heavily as he nodded. "Yes, I believe I am." Chapter 63. Cassius Black. The entire school gathered in the stands once more, as the third and final task of the Triwizard Tournament was set to begin. But before the task, they were set to hold a few exhibition matches, organized to set the mood. There were going to be a total of 3 matches, set in such a way to indicate different levels of mastery over dueling arts. The first match was set to happen between 2 students, him and Harry. The second was between 2 professors, and in that Snape was set to face off against Professor Flitwick in a duel that was set to be very exciting, and the last match was supposed to be between headmasters, where Dumbledore himself was going to face off against the deputy headmaster of Drumstrang. Igor Karkaroff had suddenly landed himself in quite some trouble and had been taken away by Bulgarian authorities over allegations of embezzlement and other crimes. And it was good that they had taken him away, because otherwise Cassius would have exacted his own revenge in such a way that could have caused everyone some trouble. But that did not matter now, and as he stood there in the tunnels waiting for the announcer to finish making the introductions and informing everyone of the formats, he gazed at the wand in his hand. Unlike his usual aspen, this one was longer and made of elder with an unknown magical core, and while he had speculated that the power of the wand was a myth, but his speculations had been wrong. "The elder wand," whispered the woman who had become sort of a mentor to him, whispered from the side. He could feel a subtle magical connection between the wand and the stone, and wondered if, just like the myth of the power of the elder wand, there was perhaps more to the rumors about uniting the 3 Hallows. "Do you have any idea how many wizards and witches have dedicated their entire lives just to search for this one wand?" she continued, and the number was somewhere in the thousands. The elder wand had a rather bloody history and for good reason, though a part of him wondered if he truly deserved it. "Do you think he drew that duel on purpose?" And she was quiet for a moment before she answered. "I don't think it matters really," she answered, making him frown as he looked up at her. "A duel is not a true measure of a wizard's strength. It is a complex clash of spells and magics that involves 1,000 factors, and it did really range from one's physical fitness, to their mental prowess, and the repertoire of spells available to them. The question should be, are you as powerful a wizard as Albus or not?" And he looked into those greyish-silver eyes and asked that very question. "Am I as powerful as him or not?" he asked. "You are," she assured him, with the smile of a proud parent. "And you have the potential to be much stronger," and the wand in his hand began to heat up, as if assuring him of its support and power, as she turned to the side and frowned. "I believe we have some guests," she said, and with that, her body vanished. A few seconds later, he heard the sound of boots, and turned to the side and saw Daphne walk towards him. "What are you doing here?" he asked with a joyous smile, as the blonde raised a brow as she walked forward until she was inches from him. "Why? Were you waiting for someone else?" she asked with a tease, and he smirked. "And who else would I ever wait for?" And she smiled, before nodding. "Well, once you walk outside, you will learn that you have become quite a hot commodity," and he knew that, for much like Harry, he had gained a nickname for himself as well. The Unchosen One, based upon his unwilling and unexplainable selection in the Triwizard Tournament. And so, the Daily Prophet was dubbing this match as the match between the proverbial Chosen One vs the Unchosen One. And he kinda liked the name. "Do you feel threatened?" he teased her, and the blonde smirked. "Because of you," she began, looking into his eyes. Never, and amongst their friends, she was the only person who knew exactly what was at stake today, and who exactly he was set to face in the body of Harry, and as he heard Dead call for Harry amidst a roaring cheer, he knew that he would have to go soon as well. "Well, I guess it is time for me to go," and before he could move, she stopped him, as she grabbed his face. "The world may never know about the burdens that you carry, but always remember that I know," she began, as she looked him in the eye. "And while I may not be able to walk out onto that arena, know this that come heaven or hell, death or life, I will always stand with you," and though it was subtle, he could sense a thread of magic emerge in between them, as she made an unbreakable vow. "Daphne. I am yours, and you are mine," and with that, she pushed herself up in the boldest act ever and crashed her lips on his own, and she tasted so sweet and minty that it surprised him before she backed away as Dean called out his name. "Go and kick the Dark Lord out of Harry," she said with a smile. "I will be waiting for you right here," and though he had always trusted her more than anyone else, this went beyond that. "I will be right back," he assured her with a smirk, as the Elder Wand felt warm in the holster, rearing for victory as he walked out of the tunnel amidst a thundering cheer. And here we have our second competitor. The heir to the Black family. The Slayer of Dragons. The Unchosen One himself. And Dean would have a really good career as a commentator in the future as Cassius slowly strode forward and stood in the arena, face to face against the Dark Lord who threatened all that he held dear. Cassius Black. And unlike before, the stands were almost equally divided, and hundreds cheered for him, as he looked Voldemort in the eye, and he had given up on all pretenses. He had taken off the glasses, showing everyone his red glowing orbs. "I will give you one last chance," he began as those eyes gleamed. "Kneel." And Cassius whipped out his wand in response and took his stance. "And I will say only one thing to you," he taunted, feeling a bit cheeky as he smirked. leave. And those lips thinned as he drew upon Harry's wand, and took his stance as they both got ready for the duel. Let no one ever say that the Dark Lord is not a generous man. In the end, the entire arena grew silent, as the sound of cannon fire indicated the start of the match, and Harry's wand blurred as a giant purple orb rushed towards him. Still, Cassius surprised him, as he cast his first spell using Parcel Tongue, and saw those red eyes widen as the ground under his feet morphed into snakes, and they began to coil up his body, while they bit into his skin. 0000. Albus Dumbledore. Few people understood exactly what was at stake here, as the two young wizards began to duel, and as the first spells were cast, the realization dawned on the onlookers that this would not be a simple duel. That while Harry and Cassius may be the youngest of the candidates, the duel between them hardly reflected that, as Cassius showcased his mastery over Parcel Magic, becoming the first wizard in perhaps 100 years to use it so openly. Was that? Madame Maxime gasped from the side, as snakes began to coil up over Harry's body, as Cassius split apart the purple orb and launched a barrage of simple spell chains at Yam, who took a second to break free from the Parcel Magic spell. Yes, that was Parcel Magic, he confirmed, as the Beauxbatons headmistress frowned. But how? And he shrugged. Cassius Black is a boy of many mysteries. This is just one of them, and the boy's prowess. Despite his disadvantage, Tom did not back down and dodged and blocked many of the spells going on the defensive as Cassius began to push his advantage, and he saw him move his wand in that familiar pattern as an invisible slash rushed at Tom, bypassing his rapidly erect shield forcing him to jump to the side to avoid the spell. And just as Cassius was about to attack him once more, Tom moved forward and used his raw magical prowess to dispel all the spells, as he began a barrage of his own. Are they really just fourth-year students? Gasped Mikitov, the Drumstrange vice-headmaster who had replaced Igor, and he was not the only one filled with surprise, for the entire arena had grown silent in awe of the magic at display as Cassius parried away magic after magic. And unlike him who had seen this before, Tom was not prepared for the plan for as he smelt an opportunity, and blasted a massive spell towards him. Bombarda Maxima. And this orb was nearly half as big as his own body, as it raced towards Cassius, and it was strong enough that even if Cassius was to bring up a shield, the impact would be strong enough to give Tom a perfect opportunity. This has to be stopped. The spell could harm him. Madame Maxime gasped from the side, but Dumbledore remained seated as he saw Cassius raise his wand straight in the air, and the Elder Wand's tip gleamed in an ominous white light as he brought it down, as the entire arena heard his whisper. Cleave, and the words were uttered in Parcel Tongue, and Albus only knew the meaning for he had asked Cassius for it, and as he brought it down, it was not just the spell he split. Tom's experience showed, as he jumped at the last second, though not before, a massive slash landed on his shoulder, as the very arena grounds were split into two. You have to stop this. Maxime whispered, but with Igor gone, he was the chief organizer once more. Let them duel. Bagman added joyously, as he glanced on excitedly, as Tom glared at Cassius, as the split spell exploded, and caused massive craters. Duel. This is more like a death match. Mikitov added, but he did not support Maxime. But I am with the Bagman. Let the boys show us what they are made of. And he remembered old tales from years ago, about Drumstrang and how the school was rather lax with student safety, and how everything there was decided based on powers. Let them make a good showing. Albus defended his stance as lightning sparkled around Cassius's wand, as he used his favorite spell, and threw lightning towards Tom. After all, this is not a simple duel, really. This might serve as motivation for the students, he added, hoping that this would inspire an entire generation of wizards to experiment and dream, just as him and Gellert had done so for a generation years ago. Tempest. And that spell reminded him so much of someone from his youth, when suddenly Tom's eyes gleamed. Protego de Provo. And darkness gushed out of Tom's body. They swallowed the lightning, as the massive cloud of darkness rushed towards Cassius, as it threatened to encapsulate the entire arena, and he saw Cassius try to push it back. Still, Tom's spell was menacing, and it blew past his shields and encapsulated the entire arena. We cannot see anything now. And if the sparks of light were anything to go by, he could tell that the duel continued under the cover of shadows. Still, the darkness put Cassius at a disadvantage, when suddenly he saw the cloud of darkness expand, as if it was trying to contain a storm. Still, a second later it splittered, and was thrown apart as a massive torrent of fire emerged from the center of the arena, and blew away the cloud of darkness. And then he watched as Cassius spun the wand around his head, as the fire began to coil around him, just as the darkness did the same for Tom, and as the darkness began to take the form of a snake, coiling around Tom, the fire shifted and morphed into the form of a skeleton as they both whispered the names of their spells. Protego. Protego. Diabolica. Diabloica. And the serpent rushed towards Cassius as the giant, massive, fire-skeletal monster pushed forth his hand, and smashed into the darkness of serpents, and by now the secret was out as all eyes in the booth turned towards him, as Maxime and Screamgore were the first to notice that something was wrong here. Tell me, Albus. The Beauxbatons headmistress whispered as she gave him a sharp look. What exactly is going on here? Indeed, Screamgore chimed in as all eyes turned towards him. Because, this is no duel between mere children. It is not, he answered, truthfully. This is a duel that will determine the future of our world. Chapter 64. Cassius Black. Protego Diabolica. Cassius whispered, and the fire around him morphed into a giant skeleton. It roared as Tom, standing in front of him, whispered the same spell name. For Cassius, however, it was darkness that coiled around him, taking the form of a giant snake that rushed towards him. Boom! The darkness clashed against the fire of his skeleton as Cassius met Tom's gaze and realized that this was it. Consider me impressed. Tom's whisper reached his ears, as he held onto his ground, as their magics both dissipated as they began to throw another barrage of spells at each other, and their wands moved in unison as the space between them cracked and croaked. Thung! Bang! Spells, visible and invisible, crashed into one another, as both of them hollowed out their reserves, and he could feel the drain from the fight settle in, but the drain was much greater and significant for Tom. You are getting slower, Cassius taunted, and saw those lips thin, as slowly but surely he began to gain an advantage. His spells began to slip through his defense, and whipped past him, as Cassius made one final push and saw those red orbs gleam. How? He raged, and the answer was obvious, for while he may have much of Tom's skills and mastery over magic, he was using an incompatible wand, in a wholly untrained body. Because you are nothing more than a parasite. And with that, Cassius used his speak to cast a quick stunner, but he did not just cast one stunner, he twisted his wand in quick succession, as he launched 3 more, one behind another. Prodigal. Tom whispered, and the golden shield gleamed into existence as one stunner after another crashed into the golden shield. Bang! 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 And the 3 spells hit the shield, as Cassius baited him into attacking, and Tom, angry as he was to the bait, and launched a quick bombarda at him, and just as the spell was about to hit him, Cassius vanished with a crack as he operated right above him much to his surprise, and aimed his wand at him. Sectum Sempra. And the spell whipped through the air, and since the spell rendered all shields useless, he moved to the side, but he saw his spell cut his shoulder, but the Dark Lord sent another purple orb towards him, as Cassius twisted his wand once more, preparing to throw another offensive spell. Crack! And just before the spell could hit him, he vanished once more and this time appeared behind Tom, and launched a spell at Tom. And again, Cassius operated and launched a spell and operated again. It was an old technique, one that had become rather obsolete in modern dueling era, but one that he had found himself leaning towards as he slowly but surely whittled down Tom until he appeared in front of him, and just as he was about to launch his spell at him. Enough! Tom raged, and magic rushed out of him in a wave, as Cassius found himself pushed back, darkness pushed out of him, and just as he faltered for a second, that was all Tom needed. Avada! And his wand was aimed at him, gleaming the ominous green, and just as Cassius prepared himself to teleport once more, he saw Tom's body grow rigid for a second, and those red eyes flashed a hint of green, as the man fell to his knees, and Cassius moved quickly. Stupefy! You dare defy me! He thundered, and the hint of green vanished as he jumped to the side to avoid his spell, and rolled on the ground, as Cassius took a deep breath, and moved his wand in a semicircle, as he whispered the name of the spell taught to him by Salazar himself. Expecto Patronum. And this time magic rushed off of him, and blasted away the darkness as a unicorn rushed out of his wand and headed straight towards Tom, and he could see the split, as the color of his eyes began to shift, and he began to writhe on the ground. No! He heard a visceral and gut-wrenching scream come out of that throat, as the unicorn passed right through him, and for the first time in some time, he heard Harry's nasal scream. Get out! And he could see the struggle, as Harry's wand fell away from his hand, and Dean announced the end of the duel. No! But Cassius had not been quiet in that time, for while he had hoped that a powerful patroness could split the souls, Salazar had taught him the ultimate form of the spell as well. Per lumen solus, tenebris vincam, he whispered, as the patroness began to glow and take the shape of an orb of light as he felt the wand in his hand begin to heat up. Patronum solus. And the light was deafening, and he watched as Tom's shadow was pushed out of Harry, as a visceral scream tore through the arena. No! And as the blinding light faded, Cassius fell to his knees. The adrenaline rush fueling him in the last seconds began to fade, as Dean's voice began to register to his ears once more. "It is over. It is finally over." Dean shouted, and he looked to the side, and saw the headmaster descend to the arena as he walked up to the unconscious form of Harry. "And I have no idea what I have just witnessed here. But I know enough that this was history. History, I say." And indeed it was, as Cassius slowly rose back up as the crowd roared in full, making the ground shake. And winner is the boy who chose himself. The Unchosen one. Cassius Black. The duel was brutal, and in the end, he had to be taken to the hospital wing, where the matron whispered quite the curses as she saw his and Harry's condition, but in the end, while he needed to rest for a few hours, Harry had yet to wake from his slumber. Cassius himself woke up late into the night, bound to a bed in the hospital wing as Harry lay beside him, and a part of him wondered if the spell had worked or not. He had to know, and so he reached for the stone in his pocket, and thankfully it was still there, and as he gazed at the closed doors, he turned it thrice in his palm as he closed his eyes and whispered a name, long forgotten by the world. Tom Riddle, and as he opened his eyes once more, a young boy stood in front of him, his face pale and pearly white, and even the silver and grey could do little to hide the red, menacing gaze of his. And he saw those lips snarl as they gazed at him, as relief filled his heart, and just before he could begin screaming, he twisted his hand once more, and Tom Riddle vanished as he should have years ago, as Cassius felt the burden of destiny and fate lift off his shoulder. Ever since he had taken his first breath in this world, the spectre of Tom Riddle had hung over his head, menacing him, threatening him with death and destruction of all that he held dear. And now he was gone. The world was finally rid of the monster that was Voldemort. The door to the hospital wing creaked, and he turned and saw the headmaster walk in, his steps quiet and cautious as he strode into the room. "Poppy mentioned that you would be awake by now, and she had, just before she had kicked everyone out of the room, including the headmaster. He is dead," Cassius couldn't help but whisper in some relief. In some joy, and even the headmaster stilled at his words, before asking again. Are you certain? He asked, and Cassius nodded, showing him the stone in his palm. I just confirmed it myself, and those blue eyes dimmed slightly, as Cassius heard him sigh in relief. Thank you, the headmaster whispered as he stepped forward, and gazed at the slumbering form of Harry Potter, as he gazed at the boy who had suffered the most because of his failures. You have done me a great favor. One which I could hardly ever hope to pay back, and in the end, he just shrugged. I am just relieved that it is over, and he was, for the doubt and fear that had lingered in his heart for decades now was all gone. Yes, now I can die in peace with the knowledge that the fate of the wizarding world is in safe hands, and that made him stop. But I thought you had a year, and the man nodded. I did, but that was before I agreed to train you, and Cassius had not considered that, as those blue eyes dimmed. Now, but I have half that time. Still, it is time enough for a man such as me, especially since I no longer have to worry so much about the future, he whispered with a smile as he walked towards him. The duel? There will be questions about it, Cassius reminded, and the man nodded. I know, and we will have the answers. But you have greater things to worry about, and indeed, for tomorrow, he was set to face off against the headmaster again, for the final stage of the tournament. Rest, you deserve it, and with that, the headmaster left, leaving him alone in the room once more, as he stared out the window at the clear skies and wondered what he was going to do tomorrow. And so the last stage of the Triwizard tournament began, and each of the contestants was set to face a selected headmaster, or Screamgore in the case of Cedric. His was the last match, and he could sense the whole arena waiting for the final bout with bated breath, excited to see more from him given his showing yesterday. Do you really think you can do this? Daphne asked him worriedly, and he shrugged. Of course, it was but one duel which had left him drained, and the blonde's lips thinned. Plus, you need not worry, he whispered as he stood up from the table and gave her a wink. I have a name to live up to, and she frowned for a second, until the realization finally dawned on her as she shook her head. You cannot be serious, she questioned, and he was. He had given much thought to the headmaster's offer, and had realized that he had fought quite hard to gain this freedom, and that he was not quite ready to give it all up just yet. So, hold on, I will be coming right back, he told her, and walked onto the stage, amidst a loud cheer as Dean's voice rang loud. And here we have our last contestant. Cassius Black. And what miracle will he show us today after his stellar victory yesterday? And the headmaster stood in his place, waiting for him as he slowly took to the stage. Will we see another duel for the ages as he clashes against our very own headmaster? Will this be the duel for the changing of the eras? And it was supposed to be, but Cassius had spent all these years with the constant specter of Voldemort hanging over his head. So, for the next 4 years he was going to enjoy his life. I know that you want me to succeed you, headmaster, Cassius began, as he took out his wand got into his stance rather lazily, as the blue-eyed man did the same. But, I am afraid I am not quite ready yet, and the man frowned at his words, as the countdown began. I want to live a little before I get hobbled down by the future, and just as the cannon was fired Cassius stood tall, as once more as he raised his wand arm, for the entire arena to see and opened his palm. I see, the headmaster nodded, as the wood hit the floor as Cassius whispered to the entire crowd. I forfeit. The Unchosen One strikes again. Chapter 65. 15 years later. Phileas Flitwick, headmaster of Hogwarts. The wizarding world of today was far different than the one he had walked into years ago, or even the one from but a decade ago. The scars from the last war had finally begun to heal and the wizarding world was once again moving forward with rapid transformation and change, most of which could be attributed to the boy sitting in front of him. It had been more than a decade since Albus had left the world, and a year ago, Minerva had followed after the old boy, leaving him in charge of Hogwarts, and now, as Phileas felt his own time drawing near, it fell to him to leave the school in capable hands. And in the end, there was no better choice than the boy sitting in front of him, for while Minerva and he may have succeeded Albus, they were just placeholders. For his real successor was the boy who sat in front of him. Albus was not just the headmaster of Hogwarts, he was the pillar of Britain's magical world and one of the world's most powerful and influential wizards. The man had always shied away from that power because of his haunted past, yet any such mistakes did not weigh down Cassius Black, and he was beginning to step into the shoes left by Albus, and was already one of the youngest warlocks of the ICW, and now was set to be headmaster soon. We had a bet, you know, he began as he glanced at Albus in the picture behind him. About me, the young man asked, and Flitwick nodded. Yes, years ago, upon your graduation, Albus and I sat down and discussed your future, and it was the last time they had sat down together, for Albus had left the world soon after, but he could still remember their little bet from that day. Albus was certain that you would one day become the headmaster, while Minerva believed that you would be the minister for magic, and the young man chuckled. Well, my wife is the minister, so, I think Professor McGonagall was not completely wrong, and indeed, the papers still talked about the rise of Daphne Greengrass, another one of their students, and it warmed his heart to see them all coming into their own, each of them excelling in their careers. How is she? And it had been some time since he had met the girl, as young Cassius Black answered with a nod. Fine, and swamped with work, and of course she would be, for the ICW had finally begun to notice the rapid pace of advancements being made in the Muggle world, and now all over the world, the magical communities were working together to find a solution for the day when the existence of their world would not be able to remain a secret from the Muggle world. That is the life of a minister, and the black-haired man nodded. Still, you have told me their guesses, but what of you, Professor? What did you think I would become? And Flitwick smiled, as he told him of his own guess. I thought that you would go into dueling, and wasn't it a teacher's desire to see their favorite pupils walk in their footsteps, and the boy had done so for a time. Well, one can say that all of you were partially correct, and they were for, while he may not be the minister, Daphne Greengrass would never ever have been able to defeat the young Mr. Zabanai, if not for the backing and support of her rather powerful and influential husband. After his studies at Hogwarts, Cassius Black had gone from strength to strength as he became the youngest person to win the dueling championship, and then retired shortly afterwards to focus on his craft as a rune master. The young man then went on to invent an entirely new runic structure, one that allowed magical objects to work in tandem with Muggle technology, and that was just the start of his rise. For using the funds of the Black family, he created a fund to support young and upcoming talent, which then later flooded the world with innovation and discoveries that had begun to change the very fabric of their world. New spells, new methods of casting, and so forth. The world was changing, and it was doing so rapidly, and Hogwarts had to change with the changing times, and who better to lead it through this change than the one who had pioneered it all? Indeed, we were, for the boy had somehow become more than all three of them had hoped. And Phileas felt proud that he was one of his students, and that a Ravenclaw would once more become the headmaster, as the old wizard reached for his wand. I don't think I need to tell you about the duties of a headmaster, for the boy had been serving as a teacher here for some time now, and though he taught an elective, runes had sort of become a compulsory subject at this point, for nearly every student at the school took the class. There was talk amongst the governors and the teachers to make the subject a permanent one. How is your brother? He asked, and for a time, the two twins had become estranged until an intervention by his wife's sister, Astoria, brought them together once more, and though he would never take the Malfoy name again, he had heard that they were on better terms now than they had been in years. Fine, he answered somewhat stiffly. I have heard that he is still competing with Harry these days, and their rivalry had refused to die down, as Cassius chuckled with him. Yes, they are both Aurors now and still remain rivals to one another, and it felt good to see students flourishing and growing, and building families. Well, that is good then, and with that, Phileas slowly slid out of the chair and motioned for him to replace him. Come sit, this now belongs to you, and he could still remember the day he had sat in that chair, and it had been a sad affair, for Minerva had just left the world, leaving him as the last beacon of a dying generation of wizards and witches. The boy seemed hesitant at first, yet after some seconds, he rose up and sat down on the chair of the headmaster, and Phileas could see the title suit him as he felt the control of the wards transfer to him, as Flitwick passed on the reins of the school to the next generation. Albus mentioned that you were rather interested in the founder's diaries, and those were records that no headmaster was allowed to share with anyone in any shape or form, and every headmaster was encouraged to leave a written record of their own, though few thought to do so. Yes, I am, and that was why he had taken them out and put them on the desk. They are right there, though, before you dive into them I would recommend that you read what Albus left for you, and the man had been so sure of his prediction that Cassius would one day become the headmaster, that he had left an entire section for him in his writings, and neither him nor Minerva had read it out of respect, but he was still interested in what was written in there. I will, he agreed, and Phileas then walked slowly out of the empty office, and he had already packed his belongings to make room for the new headmaster, and just as he was about to leave, he stopped and turned to face his former student one last time. Good luck, headmaster. And as Cassius Black sat there in the office of the headmaster, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by it all. Sometimes he could hardly believe the life he was living and how the world had changed because of him. But this was just the beginning, for just as the wizarding world was changing, the world of Muggles was changing as well, and the survival of witches and wizards all over the world depended upon him. Yet he was not alone in this journey. He was joined by friends and colleagues all over the world, from Astoria and Tracy in Ilvermorny to Hermione and Susan in Beauxbatons, each of them was working towards the same goal. But his greatest support was his better half, without whom he would not have been able to accomplish half of what he had done, and now Daphne was the Minister of Magic, holding the highest office in the land, and with the way things were looking, she would hold it for decades to come. Amidst all that, he was rather curious about the words Albus Dumbledore had left for him, and the man had often mentioned how he had left behind a message for him, one that he would receive when he was ready. It was finally time for him to read it, and so he reached for the late wizard's diary and schemed over its contents until he reached a folded page, with his name written on it along with a silent descriptor. For Cassius Black. The boy who chose himself. 0000. This is it. The story ends. I kinda forgot about uploading it with all the stuff going on in my life, which is a great mess up on my part. So, apologies for that. This story did not go the way I wanted it to. I had an extremely dark and ominous plot in mind for this, yet I just couldn't get the shift done. I tried to do the best I could, which I feel was not enough. Hope you guys liked it, and if you did not, I apologize. I have begun uploading my next work. Lily's Twin SI. Go ahead and give it a look, and as always, help me out through my Patreon. www.patreon.com/drkest. Peace out.